Hello. Let me tell you my story. A story that began with the slow rhythmic ticking of a clock that seemed to mock the stillness of my life. One day, a Wednesday that started with the hopeful hum of a spring morning, my husband shattered the quiet sanctity of our home. He walked through the heavy oak doors, not with the usual briefcase, but with a bundle swaddled in soft white velour. It was a 3-month-old infant, small and fragile, thrust into the grand cold foyer of our estate. Vance claimed the boy was the son of a distant relative, a tragic soul who had met a sudden end, leaving this child orphaned and adrift. He spoke of legal adoption as if it were a matter of simple corporate logistics, a civic duty performed by a man of his standing. But as I leaned in, my gaze tracing the delicate features of the sleeping child, the air in the room seemed to thin. Beneath the infant's skin I saw it, the undeniable haunting shadow of my husband Vance Kensington. It was etched into the arch of the eyebrows, the distinct sharp curve of the jawline, a mirror image that defied every word he had spoken. My mother-in-law, Cordelia Kensington, stood nearby, cradling the baby as if he were a holy relic recovered from the wreckage of the past. She made no effort to temper her adoration. Her usual veneer of aristocratic restraint crumbled, replaced by a raw, unfiltered joy. Right in front of me, with a piercing look that felt like a deliberate strike, she blurted out, "This is true Kensington blood." Later, the weight of that day would settle into my marrow, leading me to the inner pocket of his bespoke suit jacket. There, amidst the smell of expensive tobacco and cedar, I discovered a hidden prenatal care folder. The name on the forms was Sloane Dempsey, the very woman who, at our wedding years ago, had graced us with a wide, artificial smile and introduced herself as his cousin. The coincidence was too jagged to be accidental. The day Vance brought that infant home was a Wednesday at 3 p.m., a time I remember with the sharp, agonizing clarity of a traumatic memory. That very morning, I had been at the clinic, braving the antiseptic chill of sterile rooms to run tests for a planned pregnancy. We had been married for 5 years, and Cordelia Kensington never missed an opportunity to sharpen her tongue on the subject of my barrenness. It had started with subtle gossamer hints, which soon morphed into open, cutting suggestions at the dinner table, and finally into gratuitous public humiliations that left me breathless. I was 32, healthy and vibrant. My fallopian tubes were clear, my ovulation was clockwork, and the doctor had given me a gentle, reassuring smile, telling me everything was perfect and I simply needed to breathe. Driving back to our estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, the late afternoon sun glinting off the dashboard, I had been rehearsing the words I would use to break the good news to my husband that evening, my heart soaring with the hope of a new beginning. Instead, I walked into a suffocating, prearranged welcoming committee in our living room. Cordelia was perched on the velvet sofa, the baby in her arms, sporting a radiant, triumphant smile that didn't reach her eyes. Our housekeeper, Greta, hovered beside her, holding a bottle of warm formula like a ritual offering, cooing in a honeyed, nauseating tone, "This child is incredibly lucky to fall right into a home as prestigious as the Kensingtons." Vance stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette imposing against the manicured grounds of the estate, deep in a hushed, firm phone conversation. "Yes, the paperwork is almost finalized. Custody won't be an issue," he declared, his voice cold and devoid of the warmth I had once mistaken for love. I stood in the foyer, the weight of my medical results pressing against my ribs like a physical burden. I swapped my heels for my soft indoor loafers, the silence of my movements contrasting with the chaos in my mind, and I slipped my folder deep into my designer tote, shielding it from their gaze. Walked into the light of the living room and asked, "Whose child is this?" My mother-in-law looked up, her expression shifting, her smile tightening into a thin line of porcelain ice. She spat out dismissively, "Vance didn't tell you? It's the baby of one of his distant cousins. She was killed in a car crash and the child was left all alone. Vance, with his big heart, decided to adopt him." The infant, swaddled in white velour, had skin as fair as winter snow and long dark lashes that fluttered against his cheeks as he slept. I stared at his tiny face for a few seconds, and my heart began to pound with a frantic, relentless rhythm. The resemblance was striking, a biological signature that rendered their lies obsolete. Vance hung up the phone and walked toward me, his presence looming large. Standing over 6 feet tall, he blocked the light from the baccarat crystal chandelier, casting a massive, suffocating shadow over my face. He placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, his touch devoid of tenderness, and spoke in a tone that left no room for disagreement. "Vesper, I meant to talk to you about this tonight. My cousin died suddenly. I couldn't leave the little guy to the foster care system. For now I've brought him here. From this day forward he is our son." "Which cousin?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper against the roaring in my ears. "I didn't know you had a cousin who was expecting a child." "A distant relative." "You don't know her," he replied, his eyes evasive, sliding away from mine. My mother-in-law inserted herself into the space between us, her voice sharp with condemnation. "Vesper, why are you asking so many questions? Vance is doing a beautiful charitable thing and you're interrogating him. People are going to start saying the Kensington daughter-in-law is unspeakably petty." I didn't say another word, the air suddenly too thick to draw into my lungs. That evening, while Vance retreated into the fortress of his study, the doors clicking shut with finality, I found myself in our walk-in closet, aimlessly organizing the racks of clothes. His suit jacket was hanging on a polished valet stand, the fabric stiff and impeccably pressed. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I prepared to move it toward the dry cleaning bag, when I felt the slight, unnatural bulge in the inner pocket, a secret waiting to be unearthed. Bag when my fingers brushed against something stiff, tucked deep within the hidden sanctuary of the inner pocket. A folded piece of paper, crisp and jarring against the soft wool of the suit. I hesitated for a heartbeat, a foolish reflexive instinct to respect his privacy, before the cold curiosity took hold. I pulled it out, my thumb catching on the edge as I unfolded the document. It was a standard clinical sheet of paper, the kind that smells of sterile air and antiseptic, bearing an elegant letterhead embossed in gold. Sutton Place Women's Clinic, Upper East Side, New York. My eyes scanned the lines, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Patient, Sloane Dempsey. Age 28. Gestational age, 36 weeks. The headings swam before me, a terrifying inventory of human creation. Ultrasound, fetal monitoring, comprehensive blood panel. Below the text, a stapled ultrasound printout showed the ghost of a profile, the tiny, distinct architecture of a human face already formed. I stared at the name until the letters blurred into ink blots. Sloane Dempsey. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 5 years ago at our wedding, the day that was supposed to be the bedrock of my future, I had seen her. She was a vision in a champagne-colored bridesmaid dress, standing just outside the threshold of the bridal suite. I remembered the way she had looked at me. Her eyes weren't filled with the joy of a cousin watching a bride, but with a visceral, jagged pain, red-rimmed and bloodshot. When I had asked Vance about her, his explanation had been smooth as silk. A cousin he had grown up with, a bond forged in childhood, an intimacy that was purely familial. I had believed him, blinded by the luminescence of my own happiness. But the seeds of doubt had been sown 3 months later, when a notification flashed on his phone, a name saved simply as cousin. The text had been brief, a dagger to my composure. "Vance, I'm pregnant." The confrontation that followed was a masterpiece of gaslighting. He had laughed, a sound so authentic I felt ashamed for ever doubting him, claiming the message was meant for her own husband, a poor, confused soul who had texted the wrong number. He had called her right in front of me, put her on speaker, and she had apologized with such practiced, trembling regret that I had withered under the weight of my own suspicion. I had apologized. I had buried my intuition. And now this The document in my hand was a map of a decade-long betrayal. Mother's name Sloane Dempsey. Date of examination: September of last year. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened the calendar, counting backward from those 36 weeks. The math was an inescapable guillotine. It pointed directly to January. Last January, Vance had told me he had to travel to Tokyo for high-stakes negotiations for Kensington Holdings. 20 full days of work, 20 full days of absence. He hadn't been in a boardroom. He had been building a life in the shadows while I tended to the empty stage of our marriage. I folded the paper precisely, mirroring the original creases, and slid it back into the jacket pocket. I hung the garment back on the valet stand, the movement mechanical, my limbs feeling as though they were filled with lead. I turned and walked out of the master suite, moving down the grand staircase like a ghost haunting my own home. In the living room, the scene was a grotesque tableau. My mother-in-law was cradling the infant, her voice dripping with a saccharine devotion I had never been granted. The baby had woken up, his eyes wide and dark, staring into the ceiling with a vacant newborn confusion. "Look at those big eyes," Greta exclaimed, her voice vibrating with an unnatural fervor. "Who does he look like?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Like Vance when he was a little boy." She stopped abruptly, the realization of her slip-up washing over her face like a cold tide. She caught my gaze, her eyes darting away in a flicker of panic before she smoothed her features. "Well, it's the same bloodline," she added, her voice regaining its icy authority. "Genetic resemblances are completely normal." I stood on the bottom step, my hands gripping the mahogany railing until my knuckles turned white. My heart was a vessel of cold, settled certainty. The madness of the situation had stripped away the capacity for hysteria. I walked over, my movements fluid, and sank into the sofa cushions. "Cordelia," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet steady as stone, "what is the baby's name?" "Alistair," she replied, her chin tilted up in a defiant arc. "Vance chose it. Alistair Kensington." Alistair Kensington, the heir to the Kensington dynasty. I nodded, the motion heavy. "I'm going to get a glass of water in the kitchen." The silence followed me as I retreated. Once inside, I leaned against the marble island, the cold stone biting into my palms. I stared into the stainless steel sink, catching the reflection of a woman I hardly recognized. Vesper Sterling, 32 years old, a mind honed by Columbia law. A woman who had once stood before a federal judge and argued for justice. I had surrendered it all, the ambition, the career, the intellectual fire, because they told me a Kensington wife needed to be a decorative fixture, a curator of a home I was never allowed to truly possess. For 5 years, I had absorbed Cordelia's barbs, listening to her tell the social elite that her daughter-in-law was charming, but lacked the gift of motherhood. I looked up at the window, my reflection ghost-like against the night outside. My eyes were red-rimmed, a mirror to Sloane's from 5 years ago, but the salt of tears was nowhere to be found. I took one final shuddering breath of air that felt like acid in my lungs. I pulled out my phone and typed a single final sentence into a secure Notes app. My thumbs hovered over the cold glass surface, each keystroke feeling like a jagged incision into the facade of my existence. Vance Kensington had brought home his illegitimate son, Alistair Kensington, a child birthed from the clandestine womb of Sloane Dempsey. As I typed the words, the weight of the betrayal hit me not as a shock, but as a long-awaited sentence. I deleted the line immediately. Not out of mercy, not because the fire of my indignation had dimmed, but because in this house, this gilded cage built on layers of deception, a digital footprint was a death warrant. I could not afford a single electronic breadcrumb that might lead to my undoing. I locked the device, the screen going black, effectively swallowing the truth back into the shadows. I sipped my lukewarm water, the glass damp and slippery against my palm, before stepping out of the kitchen. The living room felt like a stage where a play I had never auditioned for was reaching its crescendo. Vance had descended from his study. His posture shifted. He was hunched over the bassinet, and the light from the chandelier caught his profile, revealing an expression I had never witnessed in 5 years of marriage. It was raw, unadulterated tenderness, a look of profound adoration and total, terrifying fulfillment. My throat constricted, but I swallowed the bile. He had never looked at me with such primal connection. I set my glass onto the coffee table with a soft, deliberate clink. My voice, practiced and devoid of tremors, cut through the heavy silence. "Are the adoption formalities finalized?" I asked, my gaze fixed on the back of his head. "Yes, everything is under control," he replied, his voice a low hum of satisfaction. He didn't bother to turn around, his fingertip tracing the soft, downy curve of the baby's cheek with a reverence that felt like a slap to my soul. "What do I need to do?" I pressed, playing the part of the dutiful, ignorant wife. "Register him with the state. Add him to our insurance." He finally turned to face me then. A momentary flicker of suspicion darted across his features, a fleeting shadow of doubt, before it dissolved into his usual mask of arrogance. "That won't be necessary," he dismissed, waving a hand. "I've outsourced all of that to a law firm. Your health is delicate right now. Just rest." I offered a faint, chillingly hollow smile. "Very well." Cordelia, my mother-in-law, scoffed from the periphery, her presence as stifling as the scent of the lilies in the foyer. "Vesper, don't torture yourself over the technicalities. Alistair is here now. He will be your son. Treat him well. That's all anyone expects of you." "Mom is right," Vance seconded, his eyes already drifting back to the crib. Greta, the housekeeper, shot me a glance from the corner, a strange, jagged mix of confusion and a faint, lingering tinge of pity. She knew, perhaps, that the air in this room was becoming poisonous. That night, Vance didn't come to our master suite. He cited the infant's needs, claiming the baby would cry, and he didn't trust Greta to handle the nocturnal chaos alone. I lay awake in the expanse of our king-size bed, the silence of the room punctuated by the muffled, rhythmic sounds bleeding through the walls from the adjacent nursery, the infant's soft, demanding cries, the low rumble of Vance's soothing voice, and the frantic, shuffling footsteps of Cordelia, who felt the desperate, matriarchal urge to dote on her grandson even in the dead of night. At 2 a.m., the suffocating quiet drove me from my bed. I needed to breathe. As I passed the nursery, the door was ajar, a sliver of warm golden light spilling into the hallway. I didn't mean to stop, but my feet betrayed me. Through the narrow crack, I saw him. Vance was rocking the baby in his arms, his voice humming a lullaby that sounded disturbingly intimate. Cordelia sat in a nursing chair, her face etched with exhaustion but lit by a grotesque sort of joy. "Vance," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "have you settled things with Sloane? Make sure no one finds out." "Relax, Mom," Vance murmured, his gaze never leaving the child. "Sloane is already set up in Bermuda. The baby is 3 months old. Once her postpartum recovery is completely finished, I'm going to finalize her permanent residency visa and ensure her trust fund is airtight." "That's good," my mother-in-law breathed. "And what are you going to do about Vesper?" "She won't suspect a thing," Vance replied, his tone chillingly detached, as if he were discussing an item of furniture he was planning to discard. "She's lived under my roof for 5 years. She is entirely dependent on me." I stood behind the door, the wood cool against my forehead. My fingernails dug into my palms, the sharp, stinging pain the only thing keeping my psyche from fracturing entirely. I turned and walked back to my room, locking the door behind me with a decisive click. I turned my phone back on. The screen glowed with an aggressive neon intensity. I searched for Sloane Dempsey, bypassing the privacy filters until I found her ghost. A private account hidden in plain sight. Her last post was 3 months old, geotagged in the turquoise waters of Bermuda. A photograph of tiny wrinkle-skinned newborn feet. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, my little prince." I scrolled back 5 years into the past, the day of my own wedding. There she was, Sloane, draped in a champagne dress, standing outside the very bridal suite where I had prepped for my life with Vance. Someone had commented on the photo, "Sloane, the man you love, just married someone else. Aren't you devastated?" To which she had replied with a single mocking smiling emoji. I turned off the screen and closed my eyes. In the suffocating darkness of the bedroom, I listened to the steady, powerful, and now entirely cold beating of my own heart. The mourning period for the woman I had been, the ambitious, hopeful girl who believed in partnership, was over. From this day forward, I would not shed a single tear for this man. At 4 a.m., I opened the encrypted notes app once more. My fingers flew across the screen, not with trembling, but with the precision of a surgeon. I wrote through the night, cataloging the wreckage, starting with the foundation of the lie. 1. Vance Kensington and Sloane Dempsey have a long-standing affair. Sloane got pregnant in January of last year and gave birth in June. This child is Vance's biological son. 2. Under the guise of a cold, calculated adoption, Vance has orchestrated the ultimate betrayal, bringing his illegitimate child into the sanctity of our marital home, grafting him onto our family tree as his legal heir, all while I sat by, blinded by the very vows I thought we shared. 3. My mother-in-law, the iron-willed Cordelia Kensington, is not merely a bystander. She is the architect of this deception, fully aware and actively weaving the web of this cover-up. Even Greta, the housekeeper whose hands have touched my tea and my linens, is likely a complicit shadow in this house of mirrors. 4. The imperative goal is now clear as a winter dawn. I must obtain the kind of irrefutable proof that turns whispers into weapons. Every covert DNA test, every ghost of a bank transfer history, every digital fingerprint in their phone records, and those damning expatriation documents Sloane thought she had buried. I need them all. 5. I must hunt down a ruthless attorney, someone who views mercy as a liability, to evaluate my options for an absolute, catastrophic divorce, ensuring massive spousal support and a lump sum settlement that accounts for the slow, agonizing erosion of my life. 6. The absolute rule. Show zero emotion. Maintain the mask of the doting, oblivious wife to buy the time necessary to dismantle this empire from the inside. Once the note was finished, I locked it behind a complex, multi-layered passcode. A vault only I knew, protecting the blueprint of my revenge. At 6 a.m., just as the first bruised light of dawn bled into the sky, I showered, washing away the phantom scent of deceit, and went downstairs to prepare breakfast. Greta was already there, the kitchen light casting long, jagged shadows against the marble counters. When she saw me, she jolted, a nervous twitch betraying her unease. "Mrs. Vesper, why are you up so early? I can handle everything. You were up half the night with the baby. Please get some rest," she urged, her voice a hollow imitation of concern. I ignored the barb, instead tying my apron strings with a steady hand. I opened the cavernous sub-zero refrigerator, the cold air rolling out like a warning, and withdrew the eggs and butter. Vance likes his eggs sunny side up, the yolk a fragile, perfectly runny globe of gold. "I'll make them myself," I said, my voice dangerously calm. Greta stood frozen, watching me with a predatory intensity, her mouth opening as if to formulate an apology for sins she hadn't yet confessed. Finally, sensing the shift in my armor, she turned on her heel and retreated. I stood at the heavy wolf range, listening to the butter hiss and froth in the skillet. I cracked the egg, the sound sharp and final. The white set instantly, blooming like lace, while the yolk remained intact and impossibly glossy. Gazing at it, I was pulled back 5 years to the days immediately following our wedding, days when I didn't know how to fry an egg, when the kitchen felt like a foreign country. Vance had told me, with that boyish, devastating smile, that he loved flawless sunny-side-up eggs. I had practiced for an entire month, my skin mapped with the tiny stinging burns from popping grease, all to ensure his breakfast was a testament to my devotion. At the time I was a fool, believing that by working harder, by sculpting myself into the perfect, seamless wife, I would bring light to this family. What absolute searing irony. Today that perfection is a cage. Breakfast was plated just as Vance emerged from the nursery. He had dark, bruised circles under his eyes, the physical toll of his secret life, yet he walked with a light step, seeming to be in an excellent mood. He sat at the island, admired the plate I had placed before him, and offered a faint, fleeting smile. "Why are you up so early?" he asked, his eyes scanning mine for a crack in my composure. "I couldn't sleep," I lied, the words tasting like ash. I poured him a cup of black coffee and sat across from him. "Vance, I need to tell you something." "I'm listening," he said, leaning over his plate, his fork poised. "I got my medical results back from the clinic yesterday. The gynecologist confirmed that everything is perfectly normal with me. I can conceive a child without any difficulty." Vance's fork paused in midair, caught in the gravity of my revelation. He slowly raised his head, locking eyes with me, searching for a trace of a threat. I held his gaze, articulating in a soft but distinct voice, "I want a child, our own child." A lean, suffocating silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. Vance put his cutlery down, leaned back in his chair, and stared at me with an unreadable expression, his face a smooth, blank mask. I expected him to fake joy, or at least offer the comfort of a lie, but he simply stated, "Vesper, we have Alistair now. The subject of another child isn't pressing. Focus on your health first, but my tests show that." He stood up abruptly, the screech of the chair against the tile sounding like a scream. "I have a crucial board meeting this morning. I won't be home for dinner." He walked out, his stride long and dismissive, leaving me in the wreckage of his cold rejection. I sat alone at the island. The sunny side-up egg on my plate had grown cold, the yolk congealing into a dull, lifeless film. I picked up my fork and ate it, bite by agonizing bite, though it tasted like nothing at all. That evening Vance remained a ghost. He did not come home. Cordelia locked herself upstairs with the baby, guarding the secret like a dragon on a hoard. Greta was in the kitchen, the clatter of dishes a frantic, rhythmic sound. I sat alone on the living room sofa, the television tuned to a cable news network I wasn't listening to. My world narrowed down to the glowing screen in my palm. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Kensington. It's Sloane Dempsey. Vance must have explained everything to you. I hope the baby's presence isn't too much trouble. Vance and I truly love each other." The words flickered on the screen. A digital dagger dipped in the poison of feigned intimacy. "Only his family's opposition forced him to marry you." I read the sentence again, the cold, clinical rhythm of the words mocking the silent, sterile air of my living room. "Now that we have a son, you should step aside and let us build our life." The audacity of it. A demand wrapped in the velvet glove of a suggestion. "Don't worry, you won't leave empty-handed. Vance will compensate you generously." As if my life, my marriage, and my very identity were merely assets to be appraised, liquidated, and settled with a tidy wire transfer. I read the message 3 times, my heartbeat steady and agonizingly slow, like the ticking of a grandfather clock in an empty house. I did not scream, I did not weep. Instead, I took a screenshot, the shutter sound muffled by the thick, soundproof walls of our wealth, and immediately moved the evidence into my encrypted vault. I then replied, with the precision of a surgeon, "I understand perfectly." The response was near instantaneous, a testament to how long she had been hovering over her phone, desperate for my surrender. "Are you really willing to make things easy for us? That is admirable, Mrs. Kensington. You are a good woman." A good woman. The label hung in the air, a grotesque commendation for my planned erasure. I turned off the screen, the black surface reflecting nothing but the dim, ambient light. I stood up, my legs feeling fluid yet purposeful, and walked toward the nursery. The door was wide open, spilling soft, golden light into the hallway. My mother-in-law was pacing the room, a rhythmic, hypnotic motion as she gently rocked a bundle in her arms. "Little Alistaster, my sweet Alistaster. Be a good boy, my treasure. Grandma's whole heart. When you grow up, the entire Kensington empire will belong to you." Greta, ever the shadow, was nodding, her face illuminated by a subservient, sickening delight. "You are truly blessed, Mrs. Cordelia. The Kensington bloodline finally has its male heir." They were worshipping a phantom, a future built upon the ruins of my dignity. My mother-in-law spotted me in the doorway, and for a fleeting second, her smile froze, a mask momentarily slipping to reveal the jagged edges beneath. She quickly handed the baby to Greta, stepped out of the room, and in an uncharacteristic gesture, a tactical display of false warmth, took my hand. Her touch was dry, papery, and cold. "Vesper, I know this situation is unusual, but you must be understanding. Vance is an only child. A fortune this colossal cannot remain without a direct heir. If you had been able to carry a pregnancy to term, things would have been different. But since nature decided otherwise, Alistaster will be your son, and he will respect you as such." I stared into her face, which was steeped in such condescending self-assurance that she didn't even notice the fire burning behind my eyes. She patted my hand amicably, as one might comfort a pet that had outlived its usefulness. That night, back in my room, I locked the door and stood in front of the full-length mirror. I looked at my 32-year-old self, flawless skin, a figure honed by discipline, and in my eyes, a cold but unbroken light that the Kensingtons had failed to dim. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart, a lifeline buried in the depths of my past. After 3 rings, a man's voice answered, resonant and sharp. "Merrick Thorne speaking." "Merrick, it's Vesper Sterling. Can I talk to you?" A silence stretched across the line, thick with the weight of years and the sudden collision of 2 different worlds. "Vesper, it's been years. What's going on?" I cleared my throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Want a divorce? I need your services. Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "Understood. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. at my office." I hung up, wiped the call history from my log with a single practice swipe, and placed the phone on the nightstand. I turned off the light. Tomorrow would be a new day, and the architecture of my vengeance would begin to take form. Merrick Thorne's law firm occupied the top floor of a glass skyscraper in Hudson Yards, a temple of steel and ambition that touched the clouds. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see the entire expanse of Manhattan, a grid of power and vanity sprawling beneath our feet. I arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a classic black trench coat hidden behind designer sunglasses and a silk scarf, a uniform of professional detachment. Merrick had been my study partner at Columbia Law before pivoting into high-net-worth family law, founding a boutique firm notorious for its sheer ruthlessness in complex divorces. In New York's elite circles, he was known as the shark of matrimonial law, a man who didn't just win cases, he decimated the opposition. The wives he represented always walked away with devastatingly advantageous settlements, leaving their exes in the dust. He poured me a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles rising like frantic trapped spirits, and sat across from me. "Tell me everything." I took out my phone, opened the encrypted app, and handed it to him. He read my notes for 10 minutes, his eyebrows knitting tighter with every line. His silence an indictment of the madness I had endured. He finally looked up, his expression grim. "So your husband brings his affair baby into your marital home and attempts to force you to raise it. That is unhinged. What tangible proof do you have here?" I swiped to show him the photo of Sloane Dempsey's medical file, the taunting text message she had sent me, and my precise timeline of events. Merrick leaned back in his leather chair, deep in thought, the rhythmic tapping of his pen against the desk the only sound in the office. It's insufficient for now. The medical file proves she gave birth, not that Vance is the father. The text shows her hostility and intent, but doesn't technically prove the ongoing affair or paternity, and in the eyes of a cold, unyielding court, that is a chasm of doubt that will swallow our case whole. I know, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my soul. That is precisely why I am sitting in this chair. I am not asking you to file the divorce papers today, Merrick. To do so now would be to tip my hand and forfeit the war before the first shot is fired. I need you to help me architect a strategy that is not merely defensive, but surgical, one designed to dismantle his life with bulletproof evidence. Merrick stared at me, his gaze softening into an appreciative, almost melancholic smile. Vesper, he murmured, his voice laced with a bittersweet cadence. You haven't lost an ounce of that brilliant legal mind that once intimidated every clerk at the firm. I was never stupid, Merrick, I countered, my eyes burning with a newfound icy clarity. I was simply blinded by the kind of devotion that disguises a predator as a protector. Without another word, he pulled a blank legal pad from his mahogany drawer, the sharp scratching of his pen acting as the rhythmic ticking of a clock counting down Vance's downfall. We need several key elements to cage him, he stated. First, a covert DNA test legally confirming Vance is Alistair's biological father. A truth written in blood. Second, a forensic audit of his financial veins to expose him funneling marital assets to Sloane. Third, communication logs that capture the rot of their ongoing affair in their own words. Fourth, an exhaustive, uncompromising valuation of Vance's true net worth, stripped of his creative accounting. And fifth, I interrupted, my voice sharpening like a blade, he is almost certainly hiding or organizing the offshore evasion of his financial assets as we speak. Merrick stopped writing, his eyes searching mine. What makes you say that? Because he rushed to bring this child into our home to establish him as his heir, I reasoned, leaning forward. He set Sloane up in Bermuda, a known tax haven, while keeping me anchored here. This isn't the erratic behavior of a husband managing a side piece. He is choreographing a midterm exit strategy. He is preparing to file, or perhaps to vanish, leaving me with nothing but the debris of a marriage he deliberately pulverized. Merrick put down his pen, his expression hardening into a deadly, focused intensity. Vesper, if your intuition is right, it means that if he manages to transfer the majority of his personal wealth and his shares in Kensington holdings into offshore trusts, you will be left fighting for the scraps of a once great empire during equitable distribution. I nodded, the weight of the realization settling into my bones like lead. Which is why I must remain 3 steps ahead of a man who thinks I am still 3 steps behind. Merrick scribbled a name and an address on a thick, cream-colored card and slid it across the desk. It was the contact for a private intelligence firm run by Elias Vance, no relation to my husband, but a man who specialized in the dark arts of forensic accounting and complex domestic espionage. Go see him, Merrick commanded. Tell him I sent you. He will handle the covert DNA swabbing and initiate discreet surveillance that would make a ghost envious. Don't worry about the retainer. We will settle the bill when we bleed him dry. I took the card, my fingers tightening around the heavy stock. Thank you, Merrick. Don't thank me, he said, rising from his chair, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the office. Vesper, when you quit your clerkship at the SDNY, I tried to stop you. I told you a brilliant woman shouldn't sacrifice her intellectual legacy for a man's ego. You told me you loved him, and that he would never let you down. Look where we are now. I stood in silence, the walls of the office seemingly closing in as the ghost of my past arrogance stared back at me. The worst mistake a brilliant woman can make is erasing her own existence to accommodate a man's ambition, he concluded, his voice stern but not unkind. But the most important thing is that you have finally awakened. Go, keep me updated, and do not show your hand until the trap is set. Leaving Merrick's office, the city air of Tribeca felt sharper, cleaner. I went straight to the agency, a space hidden behind the nondescript facade of a loft. The man behind the desk, Elias Vance, was in his late 50s, his movements defined by a cold military efficiency. After I laid bare the wreckage of my life, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered solutions. "Can you procure a saliva sample or hair from your husband?" he asked, his eyes scanning mine for hesitation. "Yes," I answered immediately. "And the baby as well?" "Yes. In that case, give me a week." He pulled 2 sterile, sealed swabbing kits from his desk, the plastic crinkling in the silence. "Swab them, seal them, and call me. A courier will be waiting." "I need one more thing," I continued, my voice low. "I need to know exactly what is being planned behind my closed doors." Elias leaned back, his fingers interlaced. "Planting listening devices is a legal minefield. But since you are the homeowner, we can navigate the technical feasibility of microcameras. Can you guarantee a window when the house will be empty?" "Yes," I confirmed, thinking of the carefully orchestrated chaos I would create. "I will ensure the housekeeper and my mother-in-law are gone." "Excellent. Pick the day, and I will send a technician posing as an HVAC repairman to install the gear so perfectly that not even the devil would find it." We agreed, setting the wheels of betrayal in motion. On the following Thursday afternoon, the air in the house felt heavy, laden with the suffocating scent of secrets and deception. Vance would be ensconced within the sterile, high-stakes atmosphere of his Wall Street office, his mind likely churning with schemes that eclipsed the reality of our shared home. Cordelia, meanwhile, would be navigating the cutthroat social currents of her country club bridge tournament, her laughter surely as sharp and brittle as porcelain. To ensure the stage was perfectly set for our silent intrusion, I had orchestrated a calculated distraction, dispatching Greta to the furthest reaches of the state under the guise of procuring rare, specialty catering for an event that existed only in my imagination. With the house finally emptied of prying eyes and judgmental whispers, a strange, eerie routine descended upon the halls. Vance was a shadow, departing at the first gray light of dawn and returning only when the moon was high, his face a mask of practiced exhaustion. Upon his return, he would retreat into the fortress of Alistair's nursery, bolting the door against the world. Cordelia remained his vigilant sentinel, her eyes never straying far from the infant, treating the child as a pawn in her grand design. As for Greta, she scurried through the rooms like a creature hunted, her gaze constantly averting mine, the weight of her complicity manifesting in those brief, pathetic flashes of guilt that she could never quite mask. I moved through the vast, hollow echoing rooms of my own mansion like a specter, a woman erased from her own history. No one asked how I fared in the solitude. No one noticed the transformation in me, that the light had died in my eyes, that I had not graced them with a smile in days. But their indifference was a gift. It freed me from the chains of seeking their approval, from the futile yearning for their validation. I was no longer a participant in their play. I was the audience, the critic, and ultimately the architect of their downfall. On that fateful Thursday afternoon, Elias's technician materialized at the threshold, precise as a guillotine blade, draped in the crisp, nondescript uniform of an elite climate control service. I retreated to the living room, opening a thick novel that I did not read, my senses heightened to a razor's edge. Through the periphery of my vision, I watched the technician work, a blur of efficiency as he placed the pinhead-sized cameras. He moved like a master thief, secreting lenses within the ornate, crystal-laden folds of the baccarat chandelier, behind the leather-bound spines of books in Vance's study, inside the mundane plastic of an outlet near our bed, and deep within the sensors of the nursery smoke detector. 6 cameras in total, a pervasive digital panopticon that stripped the house of its sanctity. Before he vanished back into the city, he handed me my phone, showing me the interface of the dedicated application. The feed was terrifyingly clear. The high-definition video and pristine audio captured every nuance of a life built on lies. That evening, the heavy front door thudded shut. Vance was home early. Without a word to me, his footsteps retreated toward the nursery. I sat in the darkness of my own wing, trembling as I activated the feed. On the small screen, his face was illuminated by the soft glow of the room, a look of such tenderness that it turned my blood to ice. He lifted Alistair, pacing the floor with a rhythm that felt like a funeral march, his voice a low honeyed tremor as he whispered into the infant's ear. I cranked the volume to its limit. "My son, Daddy is building you an empire of gold. Everything the Kensingtons own will be yours." My fingers hovered over the glass of the touchscreen, the tips white with pressure. It was not the stinging burn of heartbreak. It was the glacial, methodical descent of a rage that had finally found its target. I had sacrificed 5 years to this estate, endured the psychological lacerations of his mother's tongue, abandoned the promise of a law career and a future of my own design to fuel his ambition. And here, in the sanctuary of his lies, he was whispering to the child of his affair. The entire family fortune, the fruits of my labor, would be diverted to a bastard, casting me into the abyss of an unpaid servant, a respectable hollow shell to shield his double life with Sloane. I closed the app, forcing a long ragged breath into my lungs. Stay calm, Vesper. If you lose your equilibrium now, you lose the game forever. The following morning, I moved with the cold precision of a predator. I surreptitiously swapped Vance's electric toothbrush for an identical one, sealing the original in plastic to harvest his DNA. In the depths of the nursery trash, I salvaged a soiled diaper, carefully extracting the infant's epithelial cells to ensure the truth could not be denied by science. These remnants of their betrayal were ferried to Elias's agency under the cover of night. Days later, the private investigator met me in a dimly lit corner of a park, handing over a secure flash drive, a digital ledger of sins. It was a forensic audit of Vance's financial arteries over the last 3 years. We identified a rhythmic, systematic hemorrhage of capital, monthly wire transfers bleeding out to a shell account in the Cayman Islands, Elias explained, his voice devoid of emotion. The amounts ebbed and flowed between $20,000 and $40,000. The aggregate had already eclipsed $1.5 million. The trail led directly to the ultimate beneficial owner, Sloane Dempsey. I gripped the flash drive until the edges bit into my skin. $1.5 million vanished in 36 months. Yet, I had been forced to grovel and justify the expense of a simple designer gown for his corporate galas. There is something more concerning, the PI added, his brow furrowed. Our network indicates Vance is in intimate consultation with a Swiss wealth management firm. He is orchestrating a massive migration of his shares in Kensington Holdings into a foreign proxy structure. If this concludes, his taxable assets in the United States will evaporate, leaving us with nothing but a void. Keep digging, I commanded, the cost irrelevant against the price of my life. Alone in my bedroom with the heavy velvet curtains drawn tight, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The transfers were mechanical, executed on the 15th of every month with the cold regularity of a ticking clock. My cursor scrolled backward through the years, landing on a date in February 3 years prior. My breath hitched. February 15th. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the gallery to see how we had spent that day. It was the day after Valentine's. Vance had lavished me with a sea of red roses, whisked me away to a Michelin-starred sanctuary overlooking the glittering lights of Central Park, and as the champagne bubbled, he had leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "Vesper, you are the love of my life." That night, he had drunk a bit too much champagne, his laughter echoing against the crystal glasses, and had fallen asleep early, his breathing heavy and satisfied. I had stood by the bedside watching his peaceful slumber, when a sharp blue light flickered across the room. A brief notification on his screen. Funds transferred successfully. At the time, I was a fool draped in the velvet of his affection, naively assuming it was merely a standard business transaction. A tax hedge, perhaps, or a private investment. Today, the memory burns with the acid of betrayal. I knew now that the money was bleeding out of our accounts into the shadows of Sloane's world, and every word of his declarations of love that night had been nothing but a sick, calculated theatrical performance. A week later, the silence in the house felt heavy, like air before a thunderstorm. The DNA lab report finally came back. A sterile piece of paper that carried the weight of an executioner's blade. The probability of Vance Kensington's paternity regarding Alastair Kensington was 99.9%. The numbers danced mockingly before my eyes. I then reviewed the hidden camera footage from the previous night, my fingers trembling slightly as I navigated the digital timeline. The audio captured a conversation between my husband and my mother-in-law in the drawing room, their voices dripping with a casual, chilling disdain. "Vance, what are you going to do about Vesper? She's been so quiet lately. It worries me. It's not like her." I leaned closer to the monitor, holding my breath. "Don't stress, Mom. She's submissive by nature. She doesn't have the spine to rebel. And even if she eventually found out about Sloane and the kid, what could she possibly do? She has no job, no independent income. If she divorces me, she won't even be able to afford rent in Manhattan. She'll never dare make a scene." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. Her entire life depends on my signature." I turned off the video, the black screen reflecting a woman I barely recognized. I walked to the window, the cold glass pressing against my forehead, and looked out over the estate's sprawling lawn. Cordelia's prized rose bushes were in full blood-red bloom, looking like open wounds against the manicured green. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Merrick. "Evidence secured. When do we strike?" The reply came almost instantly, glowing like a beacon in the dim room. "Wait a little longer. The exact mechanics of his offshore asset transfer aren't fully executed yet. Let him put it all in motion so we can nail him criminally for fraudulent conveyance and tax evasion. How are you feeling?" Merrick asked in a second text. I stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. I have never felt so powerful. It was the truth, unvarnished and raw. When you stop loving someone, when you expect nothing more from them and abandon all illusions of a happy ending, you achieve a terrifying absolute freedom. I was no longer the wife of Vance Kensington, a trophy to be kept on a shelf. I was Vesper Sterling, 32, technically unemployed, but armed with a bulletproof dossier, a ruthless lawyer, an elite investigator, and an iron will to burn his world to the ground. And then, just as the gears of my vengeance were beginning to turn, our master plan almost derailed due to a totally unforeseen biological event. For 3 consecutive mornings, I was hit with violent nausea and a dizzying vertigo the moment I got out of bed, as if the earth itself were tilting beneath me. The smell of brewing coffee, usually a morning comfort, made me gag uncontrollably, the aroma turning into a suffocating shroud. Assuming it was a stomach bug, I took over-the-counter meds, my mind focused solely on the courtroom, but the nausea persisted, stubborn and unrelenting. On the 3rd night, standing before the bathroom mirror, the harsh vanity lights revealing the pallor of my skin, a realization struck me like lightning. My period was 2 months late. My heart skipped a beat, then began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. Taking advantage of Vance being out, I took an Uber to an all-night pharmacy in a rougher part of town, hiding behind a scarf. I bought 3 pregnancy tests from different brands, my hands shaking as I paid with cash. Back home behind a locked door, I waited in the suffocating silence. 3 times in a row 2 bold, mocking pink lines appeared, indelible and life-altering. I slid down against the cold bathroom tile, the porcelain biting into my back, staring at the plastic sticks for a long time. I was pregnant. Pregnant? By the man whose ruin I was currently orchestrating. A storm raged in my head, a hurricane of competing futures. What should I do? Terminate the pregnancy or carry it to term? If I had an abortion, I would permanently cut ties. The divorce would be clean, my freedom absolute. If I kept the baby, I would be tied to the Kensington family for the rest of my life, a living link to the man I loathed. But on the other hand, this unborn child was the ultimate trump card. A child born within wedlock, the sole legitimate heir to the dynasty, standing against Sloane Dempsey's affair baby. Didn't this family have a medieval, sick obsession with bloodlines and legacy? Hadn't they humiliated me for years, whispering in hallways and behind closed doors, believing I was barren? I stood up, my legs feeling like lead, washed my face and wrapped the tests in a plastic bag, sealing them tight. I walked them out to the exterior dumpsters myself, trekking through the wet grass so Greta would never find them or suspect a thing. Clearing my throat to steady my nerves, I went back to my room, the sanctuary of my secret war, and sent an encrypted text to Merrick. "I'm pregnant." He called me immediately, his voice tense, vibrating with a mixture of professional urgency and genuine alarm. "Are you sure?" I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned a ghostly white, the cold plastic biting into my skin. 3 positive tests, Merrick. 3 distinct, unwavering lines of pink declaring the impossible. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the line, thick with the weight of the war I was about to ignite. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic ticking of a clock that felt like a countdown to my own liberation or destruction. "What are you going to do?" Merrick's voice was barely a whisper, strained by the gravity of the implications. "I'm keeping it," I said, my voice steadying into a blade of tempered steel. "Vesper, think this through," he cautioned, the pragmatism of a lawyer warring with the concern of a confidant. "If this child is born, the divorce becomes a labyrinth of insurmountable obstacles. You will be tethered to him, to this family, for the rest of your life. I have thought it through, and more, I have savored the thought. Merrick, this baby is not just a child. It is my nuclear option. The Kensington family operates on a rigid, crumbling patriarchal model, a relic of an era I intend to dismantle. Cordelia, that wretched woman, has spent every waking hour despising me, whispering in corners, and poisoning the air around me because I couldn't give her an heir. Today I am carrying that legitimate heir. If it's a boy, they will be forced to bow, to move heaven and earth to keep me from taking him, which grants me infinite, crushing negotiating leverage. And if it's a girl, the prospect is even sweeter. It will be poetic justice. They will see their desperately wanted male heir relegated to the status of an illegitimate bastard, while my daughter becomes the only legal, pure-blooded direct line to the vast, hollow Kensington fortune. Merrick let out a dark, admiring laugh that vibrated through the receiver, sending a chill down my spine. "Vesper, you are truly terrifying," he murmured. "That is exactly how you survive in this hellscape." The next day, I slipped into the clinic under the shroud of anonymity, the sterile smell of the facility a strange comfort compared to the suffocating perfume of the estate. The diagnosis was crystal clear. 6 weeks pregnant, perfect embryonic development, and a tiny defiant heartbeat fluttering like a bird trapped in a cage. I saved the ultrasound scan to my encrypted vault, a digital relic of the storm I was unleashing. Returning to the estate, I found Vance in the living room, a picture of domestic bliss that made my stomach churn. He was lounging in front of the TV, his posture relaxed, while Cordelia fawned over baby Alistair with a fervor that bordered on the grotesque. Greta hovered nearby, having just brought in a tray of fresh fruit. I walked over, my movements deliberate, and sat down next to my husband. The air shifted as I spoke. "Vance, I have an important announcement." He turned his head toward me, his eyes carrying their usual, soul-crushing indifference, masking a rot I was only beginning to understand. "I'm listening," he drawled. "I'm pregnant." The atmosphere in the room froze, the oxygen seemingly sucked out of the space. Cordelia's hand hovered stiffly over the bassinet, her face contorting in a mask of bewilderment. Greta stopped dead in her tracks in the doorway, the silver tray trembling in her hands, clinking rhythmically like a warning bell. Vance's face morphed from indifference to shock, and then slowly into pure unadulterated disgust. It wasn't the joy of a father, nor the confusion of a spouse. It was sheer visceral hostility. "What did you just say?" he gritted out, the words scraping against his throat like gravel. "I am 6 weeks pregnant." "The heartbeat is strong," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on his. I pulled the ultrasound from my bag and laid it on the coffee table as if dropping a live grenade. My mother-in-law reacted first. She practically threw Alistair into Greta's arms and lunged at the printout, her eyes scanning the grainy image with frantic desperation. Her features were twisted in a terrifying panic. She looked at the paper, then at me, then turned to her son, her voice shaking. "Vance, this is impossible. It's a fake." "Shut up, Mom," Vance snapped in an icy, serrated voice. He stood up, towering over me, his gaze brimming with pure contempt. "Vesper, do you honestly think you can play me with a forged ultrasound? For 5 years, Greta has poured a dose of liquid oral contraceptives into your warm almond milk every single morning. You cannot possibly be pregnant. It is scientifically impossible." I felt a shock of unimaginable violence punch me in the gut, a cold, dark realization dawning upon me. The milk. The warm, comforting milk Greta had religiously prepared for me every morning. The gesture I once mistook for kindness was nothing more than a systematic poisoning of my body, a theft of my motherhood. I slowly turned my eyes toward the housekeeper. She stood there, ashen and trembling, the silver tray slipping from her fingers to crash onto the hardwood floor with a deafening final clatter. "Greta," I whispered, my voice barely audible, shaking with a rage that felt like liquid fire. "Is what he's saying true?" The woman opened her mouth, a hollow, pathetic gasp escaping her, her pleading eyes darting toward Cordelia for salvation. The older woman deliberately looked away, discarding the servant who had done her bidding. Vance scoffed, completely indifferent to the destruction he had just unveiled. "Don't bother interrogating her. I ordered her to do it. I couldn't risk you getting pregnant before Alistair's situation was stabilized. The Kensington bloodline only needs one legitimate heir. A child from you has no place in this family." "No place?" I repeated, rising to meet his height, my resolve burning brighter than his cruelty. "Vance, you claim you've been drugging me with contraceptives without my knowledge for 5 years. Then how do you explain the fact that I am very much 6 weeks pregnant, and this child's heart is beating? Either your drugs expired, or your supplier conned you, or perhaps destiny simply finds a way through the cracks of your arrogance. Either way, the biological reality is right here. The lab tests are definitive." "Phew. Doubt it. We can drive to the hospital right now for a blood test supervised by a notary." The challenge hung in the stale, heavy air of the drawing room, daring him to face the truth. Cordelia, her hands trembling like dry leaves in a winter gale, snatched the ultrasound image from the side table once more. Her eyes darted frantically across the glossy paper, obsessively tracing the hospital's embossed seals, the elegant, authoritative calligraphy of the chief of medicine's signature, and the stark, undeniable accuracy of today's date. Every detail was meticulously, agonizingly flawless. "Vance," my mother-in-law stammered, her voice a thin, fragile thread as her skin drained of all color, leaving her as pale as a ghost haunting the corridors of this mansion. "This document, it is completely authentic." Her disbelief was a mirror to her fear, a frantic realization that the walls they had built around me were crumbling. "So what?" The cold, jagged dismissal shattered the silence. Vance ripped the photograph from her nerveless fingers, his movements fueled by a sudden, violent surge of contempt. He tore the image in half with a crisp, brutal sound that seemed to echo through the expansive hall, then let the pieces flutter to the polished floor like dead petals. "You are getting an abortion," he stated, his voice stripped of all human warmth, reduced to a clinical, terrifyingly hollow tone as if he were merely scheduling a mundane conference call. "The decision is final. This child will never carry the Kensington name." It will never be a stain upon our legacy. Tomorrow morning, I am personally escorting you to the clinic. You have no choice in the matter, Vesper." He stalked toward me, the distance between us closing with predatory speed. His hand shot out, his fingers locking onto my chin with a bruising, iron-like grip, forcing me to tilt my head back until I was staring directly into the abyss of his eyes. "Vesper, you live under my roof, shielded by the walls I built. You consume the food at my table, bought with the labor of my hands. Every dime that sustains your existence, every luxury you enjoy, flows from my platinum card. If I command you to bear a child, you carry it to term. If I command you to purge it, you purge it. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" I stared back at him, my eyes wide and unblinking, searching for some flicker of the man I had once pledged my soul to, the man whose laughter used to turn my darkest days into light. But there was nothing, only a hollowed-out shell, a stranger wearing the mask of my husband. A sharp, nervous laugh bubbled up from my throat, jagged and hysterical. Vance flinched, his muscles coiling with sudden, brittle tension. "What is so amusing about this?" "My own stupidity," I replied, my voice dangerously steady as the weight of my past devotion turned to ash in my mouth. "Stop this nonsense right now," Cordelia shrieked from the periphery, her voice curdling with panic. "Vesper, do not be so selfishly ungrateful. Vance is acting for your own survival. Who is going to provide for a newborn if you insist on being so willfully stubborn? Alistair is still a toddler. The burden is already far too heavy for this household. Are you genuinely trying to push us all over the edge of sanity?" I whipped my head around to confront her, my gaze burning with a newfound icy clarity. "Cordelia, you are in such a frantic, desperate rush to see me terminate this pregnancy simply because you are paralyzed by the fear that I might finally give birth to a legitimate son, a male heir who would effectively dismantle and obliterate the inheritance claims of your precious, illegitimate grandson. Isn't that the brutal truth?" Cordelia's face flooded with a deep, ugly crimson, a stark contrast to her earlier pallor. "How dare you hurl such vile, treacherous slander at this family?" "Enough," Vance roared, the sound echoing like a gunshot against the high ceilings. "Vesper, the discussion is permanently closed. Tomorrow morning at exactly 9 a.m., I have secured an appointment at Sutton Place Women's Clinic with a specialist accustomed to handling the family's most discreet, private matters. Cooperate, and everything will proceed with surgical efficiency. If you choose otherwise, I will find myself forced to become significantly less polite." I didn't dignify him with a reply. Turning my back on his hollow threats, I walked toward the grand staircase, each step a deliberate anchor to my resolve. I retreated into my suite and through the deadbolt, sliding down the door until I hit the floor, curling into a protective ball. I placed a trembling, protective hand over my stomach, feeling the faint, rhythmic ghost of a heartbeat beneath the fabric. "I am so sorry, my little one," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "I am so deeply sorry to put you through this cruelty, but I swear to you, I will never ever let them touch you." I snatched my phone from my pocket, my thumbs flying over the screen as I texted Merrick. "Vance knows about the pregnancy. He confessed to poisoning me with birth control for years. He is forcing me to an abortion tomorrow at 9 a.m. at Sutton Place." Merrick's reply hit the screen instantly, sharp and urgent. "What is your next move?" "I am not aborting," I typed back. "I have a strategy, but I need you to pull every string you have. Tomorrow morning, I will feign compliance and step into his car. I need you to leverage your contacts in the medical administration at that facility. Ensure that a comprehensive, mandatory pre-op consultation is forced upon me the very second I step through those doors. The doctor must draft an ironclad report declaring a massive medical contraindication to any termination procedure." "Consider it done," Merrick replied. Dr. Rosalind Hayes, the Deputy Director of Gynecology at Sutton Place, is a former law school contact of mine who transitioned to medicine. I am reaching out to her this instant. One final detail I added, my heart hammering a frantic, hopeful rhythm. Draft the marital settlement agreement. The moment that medical certificate is pressed into my hand, I am handing Vance an ultimatum he cannot refuse. Since he categorically rejects the idea of me bearing his heir under his roof, I will utilize this child, my child, to purchase my permanent, absolute freedom. Have you finalized the terms? Yes, I replied. First, sole legal and physical custody of the infant. Vance must explicitly waive all parental rights in future visitation. Second, a lump sum spousal support payment of $3 million, to be wired within 60 hours of the signing. Third, I waive all claims to the division of the marital assets regarding Kensington Holdings. He keeps his company, his empire, his suffocating walls, but he signs away my life unconditionally, and I finally step out of this golden cage. Merrick's response did not arrive immediately. The silence hanging in the digital ether between us felt heavy, burdened by the weight of the life-altering gamble I was taking. When the notification finally chimed, his words were laced with a caution that bordered on sorrow. Vesper, do you realize what you are walking away from? A full-blown public trial, exposing the labyrinthine depths of his assets, would net you $15 to $20 million without a sweat. It is your right, your leverage. I stared at the screen, my thumbs hovering over the glass. I know I typed back, my pulse thrumming against my fingertips. But a standard judicial divorce is a bottomless pit, a process that would swallow years of my existence in soul-crushing litigation. He is a titan. He would weaponize every cent of his wealth, every shadowed connection in his Rolodex, to dismantle me piece by piece and eventually snatch the child from my grasp. I do not want his blood money. I want the quiet sanctity of my freedom and the absolute security of my baby. $3 million is not a fortune, but it is enough to disappear. Enough to rebuild a life that belongs only to us. Agreed, Merrick signaled. I am drafting the agreement tonight. You will have it in your inbox by dawn. At 7 o'clock the next morning, the air in the Kensington mansion felt thin, brittle, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I descended to the kitchen, my footsteps muted against the cold marble. Greta was already there, a specter amidst the gleaming chrome. Upon seeing me, she flinched so violently that she nearly dropped the dish towel she was folding. A fleeting, terrified look crossed her weathered face, her features contorting into a mask of pathetic guilt. I refused to grant her the comfort of a confrontation. I simply turned my back on her. I pulled open the heavy refrigerator door, the interior light casting a harsh, artificial glow over the shelves. Deliberately, with a steady hand, I bypassed the glass bottle of almond milk, the vessel that had been my daily poison for 5 years, and poured myself a simple tart glass of store-bought orange juice. Greta approached with heavy, dragging steps, her presence an intrusion I could barely tolerate. Mrs. Vesper, Mr. Vance told me not to serve you breakfast this morning because of your medical procedure, she stammered, her voice thin. I know, I replied, downing the juice in one gulp, the sharp sweetness stinging my throat. She hovered, wringing her hands before mumbling, Ma'am, are you truly pregnant? I turned, pinning her with a gaze that felt like cold steel. Greta, for 5 years you slipped chemical substances into my drink every morning, swearing they were high-end vitamins to boost my health. Do you honestly think I would joke about something like this? The housekeeper's face drained of color, turning the shade of gray ash. I swear to God, I did not know they were contraceptives, she cried, her voice rising in a desperate pitch. Mrs. Cordelia swore they were supplements prescribed by a top doctor to help you conceive. I swear it. Whether she was a pawn or a willing accomplice no longer mattered. Her truth was a relic of a life I had already discarded. Vance walked into the kitchen then, his presence commanding the very oxygen in the room. His bespoke suit was immaculate, the fabric falling with razor-sharp precision, his hair styled to perfection, a man ready to conquer a Wall Street boardroom, not to escort his wife to an abortion clinic. His eyes raked over me, ice cold and devoid of recognition. "Let's go," he snapped. Outside, the black Lincoln Navigator sat idling, the family chauffeur standing stiffly by the door like a silent sentinel. Vance climbed into the back and I followed, sliding onto the opposite side of the leather bench. I pressed myself against the door, maintaining every possible inch of physical distance throughout the entire drive toward Manhattan. He didn't even acknowledge my presence. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his smartphone. From the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of the contact name, Sloan. He was texting her, assuring her that he was arriving at the clinic to solve the problem permanently, whispering sweet, toxic reassurances. I turned my head away, watching the avenues of New York blur into a smear of concrete and glass. I had lived in this city for a decade, tracing its veins and knowing its rhythm, but today, every familiar street corner felt foreign, an alien landscape of a life I no longer inhabited. The SUV descended into the dark, echoing maw of the underground garage at the Sutton Place Women's Clinic. Vance emerged first, his movements fluid and predatory. He reached back and grabbed me by the wrist, his fingers clamping down with a grip so tight and bruising that I had to stifle a sharp gasp of pain. "No scenes," he whispered into my ear, his voice a low raw threat that vibrated through my very bones. We ascended to the VIP obstetrics floor, a sanctuary of sterile opulence. The hallways were bright, bathed in warm, welcoming light, filled with glowing, vibrant pregnant women accompanied by partners who whispered endearments and held their hands. I was the only one navigating this space like a prisoner being led to the gallows by her own husband. The receptionist looked up, caught sight of Vance, and beamed with a sycophantic familiarity. "Mr. Kensington, the doctor is expecting you. Please right this way." We were ushered into a spacious, wood-paneled office that smelled faintly of antiseptic and expensive cologne. A doctor in his 50s stood up, smoothing his pristine white coat, his smile practiced and oily as he shook Vance's hand. "Mr. Kensington, a pleasure to see you again. Your mother explained the delicate situation. Rest assured, it is a routine, perfectly controlled procedure. It will not take more than 20 minutes. He turned to me, and for a heartbeat, a shadow of professional pity flickered in his eyes, a momentary lapse of humanity before he masked it behind a neutral, clinical smile. "Ma'am, please hop up on the exam table for a quick ultrasound so we can precisely date the pregnancy." I obeyed, my movements mechanical. The exam table was cold, and the gel felt like liquid ice against my stomach. As the wand glided across my skin, the monitor flickered to life. A tiny, fragile shape appeared nestled deep within my uterus. A heartbeat, a rapid, steady pulse, flickering in the center of the dark void like a tiny, defiant star. The doctor adjusted his measurements, his brow furrowing as he murmured, "The gestational sac is perfectly positioned. Cardiac activity is excellent. We are at roughly 7.5 weeks. 7 weeks, one more than my initial count." A strange, suffocating weight settled in my chest as the cold reality of those words sank in. I felt the pulse of a life I was not yet permitted to mourn, nor truly celebrate. Standing near the edge of the examination table, Vance interjected, his voice as flat and devoid of warmth as a sheet of polished granite. "Doctor, when can the procedure be done?" The doctor hesitated, his fingers dancing nervously over the digital chart. "In theory, we could do it today," he murmured, his gaze darting toward the cold machinery surrounding us. "But state regulations mandate a comprehensive pre-op blood panel to rule out any surgical risks. We could schedule the procedure for first thing tomorrow morning." Vance did not hesitate. "Fine, put it on the books for tomorrow morning," he decided, the finality of his command echoing against the sterile walls. With a flick of his wrist, he produced his platinum card and tossed it onto the desk with a disdainful arrogance. "Bill the entire process today. I want the highest level of privacy and comfort for my wife." The card clattered against the wood, a physical manifestation of the gilded cage he had built around my existence. Just then, a sharp rhythmic rapping at the door fractured the air. A young nurse peered in, her face pale with urgency. Dr. Hayes needs you immediately for an emergency in the surgical suite. The doctor apologized, his professional mask slipping for a fleeting second, and rushed out, abandoning us to the hum of the cooling fans. Silence stretched between us, thick and claustrophobic. The nurse turned her focus to me, her movements practiced and detached. Mrs. Kensington, I need to draw your blood for the pre-op panel. Please follow me to the lab. Vance offered a curt, dismissive nod, granting his permission for my departure. I followed the nurse down the labyrinthine corridors, the fluorescent lights buzzing like trapped insects overhead. But instead of stopping at the standard crowded laboratory, she took two abrupt turns, steering me away from the peering eyes of the staff and into a secluded hallway. She ushered me into an office adorned with a heavy brass plaque. Dr. Rosalind Hayes, Deputy Director. Inside, a woman of about 35 stood to greet me. With her sharp, short-cropped hair and gold-rimmed glasses, she exuded an air of quiet, formidable intellect. She extended a hand, her grip firm and strangely comforting. Vesper Sterling, I am Rosalind Hayes. I am a close friend of Merrick Thorne. Have a seat. We don't have much time. She sat across from me, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room as if checking for invisible listeners. Merrick briefed me on the extreme severity of your situation, she whispered, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial frequency. Everything is arranged. Under the guise of screening, I am going to diagnose a severe, life-threatening hemostasis anomaly. Essentially, I am documenting a massive catastrophic risk of uncontrollable hemorrhaging. I will issue an official medical report strictly prohibiting any surgical or chemical termination outside of a highly specialized, Level 1 Trauma University hospital. No private clinic in New York State will dare touch you with this file. At the same time, I am running a real panel to ensure that both you and the baby are perfectly healthy. Thank you so much, Doctor, I whispered, the words catching in my throat as a massive, overwhelming wave of relief broke over me, leaving me trembling. Don't mention it, she replied, her expression softening into a grimace of empathy. As a physician, seeing women coerced into aborting under the iron-fisted pressure of wealthy abusers makes me sick to my stomach. I am more than happy to help you protect this child. She moved with surgical efficiency, performing a rapid clinical exam, connecting the leads for an EKG, and drawing my blood with a steady, practiced hand. A few minutes later, she pressed a sealed envelope into my palm. It contained my real, flawless results, tucked safely behind a falsified, terrifyingly official hospital report that cited a severe blood coagulation deficit, a condition that promised a fatal hemorrhaging risk or the necessity of an emergency hysterectomy should any surgeon dare to intervene. Walking back to the first doctor's office felt like walking toward a firing squad. Vance was waiting for me, his posture radiating impatience as he tapped his Rolex against his wrist. Why did that take so long? He demanded, his brow furrowed in a mask of suspicion. There was a line at the lab, I replied, my voice steady, though my heart thundered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The male doctor returned just then, clutching Dr. Hayes's report, which a secretary had hurriedly placed in his hand. As he read the document, the color drained from his face. He looked at Vance, visibly uncomfortable, his professional confidence shattered by the severity of the paperwork. Mr. Kensington, he began, his voice wavering, your wife's blood work reveals a severe constitutional anomaly in her coagulation. Ethically and medically, I absolutely cannot greenlight a termination procedure in this facility. The hemorrhagic risk is far too high for a private clinic. Vance's face contorted, his mask of composure fracturing. What does that mean? That is impossible. As things stand, sir, yes, a severe hemorrhage could be fatal or require an emergency removal of the uterus, the doctor explained, pointing to the falsified text. I strongly recommend an in-depth hematology workup and corrective treatments over several weeks before we even consider moving forward. How long will that take? Vance snapped, his voice rising in a sharp, jagged tone. At minimum, a month, the doctor replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. Assuming her parameters even begin to normalize. Vance stood up abruptly, his skin pale with a suppressed volcanic rage. He was powerless to explode in this clinical setting, yet his presence seemed to poison the air. He shot me a single murderous glare that felt like a blade against my skin. A month, if necessary, he spat, the words dripping with venom, before storming out of the room, his footsteps echoing like thunder. Once we were back in the back seat of the Navigator, the air turned jagged, thick with the suffocating scent of leather and his potent, dark cologne. The silence was not peaceful. It was a pressurized chamber waiting for an explosion. Vance shifted, his movements sharp and predatory, and the atmosphere dropped to freezing. You orchestrated this, didn't you? He snapped, his voice a low vibrating growl that cut through the muffled roar of the city outside. I didn't blink, though my pulse thrummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Orchestrated what, exactly? My blood test. You think I'm stalling, don't you? You think this is some elaborate play to keep the seed you're so desperate to destroy? I turned to face him, forcing my gaze to remain steady, icy, and unreadable despite the turmoil roiling in my gut. Vance, do you honestly believe I possess the reach, the influence, or the sheer audacity to forge laboratory results at one of the most prestigious, top-tier private clinics in all of Manhattan? What possible benefit could I gain from dragging this nightmare out one more day? I want this over just as much as you do, perhaps even more. He didn't answer. His jaw was locked, his profile a granite monument of stubborn resentment. The doctor was explicitly, terrifyingly clear. I pressed, my voice trembling ever so slightly. I risk my life or the permanent, agonizing loss of my fertility if there are complications. Do you genuinely want me dead or hollowed out and mutilated, simply to satisfy your pathological need to have your way right this second? He turned his head then, looking away from me, his eyes fixed on the blurring New York skyline as it smeared past the tinted window in a kaleidoscope of gray and steel. He was unreachable, lost in his own fortress of privilege and cruelty. The moment we returned to the Greenwich estate, the grand doors swung open to reveal Cordelia, a vulture waiting in the foyer, her eyes alight with a hunger that made my skin crawl. No, Vance barked, the sound echoing off the marble floors as he threw his heavy suit jacket onto the mahogany console with a violent toss. The blood tests prohibit any immediate procedure. We have to wait a month. Cordelia's face underwent a hideous transformation, draining of color before flushing a bruised, angry purple. She glared at me, her eyes narrow slits of hateful, venomous suspicion. Tests? It's a performance, Vance. A cheap theatrical display. She is refusing to abort, and she's using the medical staff to shield her deception. It's obvious, Mom, Vance fired back, his voice thick with a bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that mirrored my own. But his resistance did nothing to soothe his mother. I don't care about their Manhattan protocols. I have lived my entire pristine life without ever hearing of a pregnancy that couldn't be terminated at the snap of a finger. My mother-in-law shrieked, her poise shattering into jagged shards of hysteria. Vesper, I am warning you. You won't get away with this charade. That child will never see the light of day in this house. Alistair is our only heir. He is the sun around which this family orbits, and I will not allow a mistake to cloud his horizon. I stood straight in the center of the foyer, a pillar of resolve amidst their swirling madness, absorbing her shrill screams under my husband's indifferent, cold-blooded gaze. In the periphery, I caught a glimpse of Greta, trembling like a leaf in the shadows of the hallway, her face white with terror. A laugh, sharp and incredulous, escaped my lips before I could suppress it. Cordelia, you are truly unhinged. What are you laughing at, "You insolent, wretched little thing." "I am laughing at your panic," I retorted, my voice echoing with a clarity that seemed to stun them. "You are terrified I will birth a legitimate son who will challenge your bastard's claim to the empire. Relax. Whether this child is a boy or a girl, they will never fight for a single red cent of the Kensington money, because your hollow poisoned fortune does not interest me in the slightest anymore." Cordelia stood completely dumbfounded, her mouth agape, pointing a shaking, withered finger at me as if I had just announced the end of the world. "Vance, do you hear what she's daring to say? She's mocking us." "Enough," Vance ordered, his voice cutting through the air like a guillotine blade. "Vesper, go to your room and stay there. I don't want to hear another word from you." I didn't argue. I turned on my heel and walked upstairs, the rhythmic click of my heels against the stairs sounding like a countdown. Once inside my suite, I locked the door, the heavy bolt sliding home with a finality that felt like freedom. I opened my encrypted email, and there it was, the marital settlement agreement drafted by Merrick. I read every clause with the precision of a surgeon, scanning for any sign of betrayal. It was perfect, ironclad, legally guaranteeing my absolute freedom and sole custody of my child in exchange for my express, permanent waiver of any share in the family holding company. I knew, with the clarity of a woman who had finally opened her eyes, that Vance valued his corporate shares and his gilded throne far more than he ever valued his own flesh and blood. If I had dared to demand my rightful half of the marital estate, he would have dragged me through a decade of earth-scorching litigation, determined to bleed me dry until I was nothing but dust. Letting him keep his company in exchange for his signature and a clean cash buyout was the perfect strategic compromise to ensure my survival. I printed the document on the printer in my bedroom office, the machine whirring as it birthed my ticket out of this purgatory. I signed it with a steady hand. I made a digital scan for Merrick, and I tucked the original into my bag like a holy relic. The next afternoon, the world turned gray under an overcast sky as Merrick met me at a discreet coffee shop on the outskirts of Greenwich. He handed me the final, bound version of the agreement, his eyes serious behind his spectacles. "Read Article 8 carefully," he said, his finger tapping against the crisp paper. I turned to the section, my heart hammering against my ribs. The petitioner expressly and irrevocably waives all rights to the equitable distribution of the respondent's marital assets, including but not limited to shares in Kensington holdings, family real estate, bank accounts, and financial investments. In consideration, the respondent agrees to pay the petitioner a lump sum spousal support settlement of $3 million within 60 hours of signing this agreement and irrevocably waives all parental rights to the unborn child, provided that the child is born in accordance with the legal timeframe stipulated by the medical board, after which point, the petitioner shall bear no further obligation toward the respondent or the Kensington name, effectively severing all ties, both emotional and legal, as the respondent assumes full, sole, and exclusive custody of the unborn child, with the petitioner relinquishing all claims of kinship, visitation, or contact, essentially erasing the existence of the child from her life as if it had never been conceived, allowing the respondent to proceed with the legal termination or maintenance of the pregnancy at his total discretion, provided that the petitioner's physical safety is guaranteed during the specified recovery period prior to the final transfer of funds, and furthermore, both parties agree to a strictly enforced non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific terms of this dissolution, ensuring that the reputation of Kensington Holdings remains untouched by the scandal of this separation, and the petitioner acknowledges that any violation of this silence will result in the immediate and total forfeiture of the $3 million settlement, leaving her in a state of financial ruin and legal vulnerability, thus binding her to the terms through the threat of absolute erasure from the socioeconomic status she once held, and claims to the unborn child. $3 million. The figure hung in the stagnant air between us, crystalline and absolute. My pulse didn't even flicker. It was perfect, a masterstroke of calculated precision. I had spent months submerged in the labyrinthine darkness of his financial life, conducting a forensic audit so granular it bordered on obsession. I knew the rhythm of his wealth better than he knew the heartbeat of his own marriage. Merrick, my shadow, had confirmed the architecture of his vulnerability. His personal highly liquid short-term reserves hovered at exactly $4.5 million. He could bleed $3 million instantly, moving the capital through the veins of his private accounts without triggering a single tremor at the holding company. He would swallow this deal because it was the ironclad shield protecting the jagged core of his industrial empire. If he dared to defy me, I would unleash the apocalypse. We would file for a public scorched earth divorce, a spectacle that would dismantle Kensington holdings, exposing the grotesque skeletons of his tax evasion schemes in the shadows of Zurich and the Caymans. I slid the documents back into the envelope, the paper heavy with the weight of his future, and tucked it into my bag. A cold electric thrill raced up my spine. Brilliant! I would force his hand tonight. I retreated to the estate, the silence of the hallways greeting me like a shroud. Greta was in the living room, a ghost lost in motion, frantically dusting mahogany tables that were already spotless, her eyes darting with the nervous energy of someone who knew the walls were closing in. Vance and Cordelia were absent, leaving a void where their toxicity usually breathed. "Greta, where is Vance?" I asked, my voice steady, barely a ripple in the vast room. "Mr. Vance is in his study," she stammered, not looking up. "He asked not to be disturbed for dinner." Mrs. Cordelia went out to play cards at a friend's house. The opportunity was a gift, pristine and sharp. I didn't hesitate. I climbed the staircase, my footsteps muffled by the velvet runners, and reached the heavy oak door of his sanctuary. I knocked firmly, a sound like a gavel strike. "Come in," he growled, his voice a gravelly echo of exhaustion. Vance was entombed behind his antique mahogany desk, buried beneath a mountain of financial ledgers and legal files, the yellow light of his lamp casting deep, jagged shadows across his features. When he saw me, his brow knitted in a frown of irritation. "What do you want?" I didn't offer pleasantries. I withdrew the agreement from the envelope and let it drop onto the desk, the sound of paper hitting wood sharp as a gunshot. "Sign this." His gaze drifted to the bold, capitalized title, "Marital Settlement Agreement." His face froze, the blood draining from his skin as the reality crystallized in his eyes. He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing rage. "Is this a joke? I have never been more serious, Vance. It is an uncontested divorce agreement, drafted to the letter by my attorney. Take the time to digest every clause. If the terms suit you, sign it." He rose, his movements predatory, circling the desk to close the distance between us, his shadow looming over me. "Vesper, do you honestly think you can dictate terms to me?" He snarled, his voice dropping into a dangerous, low register. "Everything you wear, the car you drive, the food you eat, it's my money. You have no job, no savings, no identity outside of my grace. Where do you think you're going to go? You will be on the street, begging for scraps in a week." I looked him dead in the eye, my gaze unyielding. "What becomes of me is no longer your problem. Sign." He snatched the document from the desk, his fingers curling into the paper as he began to tear through the pages with frantic, angry eyes. As he reached the financial clause, his features contorted in pure, visceral disgust. $3 million? You are carrying a child I don't want, and you think you can extort $3 million from me? This child is your biological son, Vance, I fired back, my voice monotone, devoid of the hurt he expected, replaced by the clinical coldness of a surgeon. "The child you tried to eliminate by secretly poisoning me with contraceptives every morning, morning after morning, in the sanctity of our own home. He isn't a bastard. He is your legal direct line heir. I will never acknowledge him," he hissed through gritted teeth, his back turning to me, his shoulders hunched in defiance. "Get the abortion and we can go back to how things were." Otherwise, you won't get a single cent. I allowed a faint, humorless smile to grace my lips. And how do you plan to deprive me of it? By kicking me out of the house? You need a court order for that, and a divorce trial in the state of New York requires a complete, forensic, equitable distribution of our marital assets. Your 6 real estate properties, your vast investment portfolios, your shares in the family holding company, and most importantly, the $1.5 million you discreetly wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands for Sloan Dempsey over the last 3 years. Are you truly prepared to see half your empire dismantled, handed over to your scorned, legally wedded wife? Vance spun around, his composure shattering, panic clearly readable in the dilation of his eyes. Did you honestly think I didn't know about Sloan? I continued, my tone sharp as glass, cutting through his bravado. Did you think I didn't know Alistair is your son? That you're paying secret, illicit alimony to his mother, and that you are preparing to relocate them to Bermuda under the cover of night? I know everything, Vance. Every lie, every transaction, every secret. Since the very first day you brought that baby home, I have been watching. I found the medical records you thought were incinerated in your jacket. I had covert DNA tests run that confirmed your paternity with 99.9% certainty. I have tracked every single one of your offshore financial transfers, every thread of your deceit. Vance's face drained of all color, the arrogance that once defined his features dissolving into a ghostly, hollow pallor. How could you possibly access all of that? He stammered, his voice a jagged shard of sound, trembling with the visceral shock of a man who had built a kingdom on quicksand. I allowed myself an icy, razor-thin smile, a mask of clinical detachment that did not reach my eyes. You forgot, Vance, that I earned my JD from Columbia Law with honors and spent years under the tutelage of a federal judge in the Southern District of New York. Did you truly believe your labyrinthine financial structures were bulletproof? To a trained eye, they are embarrassingly amateurish, the clumsy scribblings of a man who thought his wealth could mask his moral rot. He collapsed into his heavy leather chair as if the floor had been pulled from beneath him, dazed by the sudden visibility of his own demise, before the shock gave way to a violent, convulsive fit of rage. He leaped up, his movements predatory, and his fingers clamped onto my wrist with a force that threatened to snap the bone. His eyes burning with the frantic heat of a cornered animal. You are blackmailing me, he hissed, his grip tightening. Enduring the white-hot bloom of pain in my arm, I forced my gaze to lock with his, refusing to flicker. I am not blackmailing you, Vance. I am offering you an honorable exit, a mercy you hardly deserve. Sign this settlement. Pay the $3 million. Waive your parental rights, and I will vanish from your life permanently, leaving no ripple on the surface of your curated existence. If you refuse, tomorrow morning I file an at-fault divorce in Manhattan. I will press criminal charges for your covert administration of noxious substances, that birth control you slipped into my nightly glass. And I will ensure the SEC and the IRS dismantle Sloan brick by brick, exposing every cent of embezzled corporate funds you funneled through those offshore accounts. Need I remind you that my old law professor is now a federal judge and my uncle occupies a seat on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals? Imagine the media fallout on the Kensington holding stock price when this hits the front page of the financial news. His grip loosened, his fingers falling away like withered leaves. He stumbled back 2 steps, crashing against his mahogany bookshelf, gasping for air like a man starved of oxygen in a vacuum. Vesper, how could you become so calculated? He murmured, the question laced with a pathetic sense of betrayal. You made me this way, Vance, I replied, my voice steady, though I felt the stinging heat of tears of rage prick the corners of my eyes, tears I refused to let fall, for I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. You cheated on me for 5 years. You chemically poisoned the woman who stood by your side. You kept a mistress, fathered a secret child, and had the absolute, unmitigated gall to make me raise him under my own roof, an insult I bore in silence while you plotted my erasure. And now you are surprised that the snake has turned to strike? I stepped up to the desk, my shadow looming over his shattered composure. I picked up a Montblanc pen and held it out to him, a silent ultimatum. Sign. He stared at the pen, his hands hovering in the air, trembling, unable to bridge the gap between his ego and his impending ruin. Very well. You have 24 hours to decide your fate, I declared, placing the pen down with a heavy final thud on top of the document. Tomorrow at this exact time, I either have the signed agreement in my hands, or my lawyer files the papers in court and forwards the entire forensic audit to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Wall Street Journal. Choose your side, Vance. I turned away, the silence in the room heavy with the scent of old paper and failed promises. I walked out of the study, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. On the landing near the stairs stood Greta, the housekeeper, a teacup clutched in her hand, her knuckles white. She had clearly been listening, her face as pale as a funerary shroud. Greta, I said, my voice cutting through the stillness as I swept past her. I will choose not to press criminal charges against you as an accessory to poisoning, on the sole condition that you maintain absolute silence about everything transpiring in this house. You owe me that much for your complicity. The woman simply looked down, her frame shuddering, and I did not wait for an apology. I locked myself in my room, sliding down the door until I hit the hardwood floor, my whole body finally giving way to spasms of nervous tension. My ruthless determination in front of Vance had been a pure, grueling theatrical performance. Deep down I was terrified, shivering in the cold wake of my own defiance. But as I sat there in the dark, I realized that by playing the role of the cold, implacable woman, it was no longer just an act, it had become my skin. I had nothing left to lose, and in that void I found I was finally invincible. My phone buzzed, a digital pulse in the silence. A text from Merrick. I gave him the agreement. He has 24 hours to sign. I think he will cave. Why are you so sure? I typed back, my fingers steadying. Because Vance isn't afraid of divorce. He's afraid of losing his social status and shattering the family reputation. For the Kensingtons, appearances are more precious than life itself. A public scandal involving embezzlement and domestic poisoning would destroy him socially and industrially. He will sign. Understood. We regroup tomorrow. I activated the hidden camera feed in his study on my phone. Vance was sitting at his desk as still as a stone statue, staring at the divorce agreement. Suddenly, his composure shattered like fragile glass under the weight of his mounting panic. In a fit of impotent, blind rage, he swept his arm across the mahogany expanse of his desk, sending an avalanche of confidential files and meticulous ledgers crashing to the floor. The sound of paper scattering like fallen leaves was drowned out by the guttural primal howl that tore from his throat, the sound of a wounded animal cornered by its own hubris. Vesper, I reached out and tapped the screen to cut the video feed, the silence of the room rushing back to fill the void. I closed my eyes, pressing my palm gently against my stomach, feeling a tiny rhythmic flutter. Did you hear that, my baby? Your father hates me, but it truly does not matter. The realization crystallized in my heart with the clarity of ice. I simply do not love him anymore, and that apathy, that absolute absence of affection, is the very blade that is systematically destroying him. Vance could not even wait for the 24-hour deadline to expire. The next morning, as the sun began to bleed a pale, unforgiving light across the horizon at 7 a.m., he pounded on my door. When I opened it, the sight of him was jarring. He stood on the threshold, a ghost of the man who once commanded boardrooms. His features were gaunt and drawn from a sleepless night, his bespoke shirt crumpled into unsightly ridges, and his collar hung open, unbuttoned and pathetic. His right hand trembled as he held the signed settlement, a white flag of surrender. I signed, he rasped, his voice sounding like dry gravel against stone. But $3 million is out of the question. I do not have that kind of liquid cash on hand without jeopardizing the holding company's operational liquidity. And you know as well as I do what that would mean for the shareholders. I stood firm, meeting his bloodshot gaze with an unblinking stare. You managed to wire $1.5 million to the Caymans for Sloan, didn't you? Vance, do not insult my intelligence by trying to convince me you cannot find $3 million to guarantee your own immunity from federal prison. Those were complex asset transfers, he stammered, his eyes darting away. Stop lying, Vance, I cut in, my voice cold enough to bridge the distance between us. You have been lying for 5 years, and the script has run its course. It is over. He stepped into the room, his movements heavy, and walked over to the window, turning his back to me as if the light were too bright to bear. $2 million, he offered, his shoulders hunched. I will wire you $2 million and you leave immediately. $3 million, I repeated, my resolve as inflexible as iron. You recently siphoned $5 million from the holding company's reserve funds using fabricated consulting invoices, tucking it away in an escrow account in Zurich. That is textbook corporate fraud, Vance. If you do not pay the $3 million I am owed, I am handing the audit trail over to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division this afternoon. You won't just risk social ruin. You will face a very long stay in federal prison. Vance turned deathly pale, his complexion matching the stark white walls. How? He whispered, his voice trembling. How did you find out about the Zurich account? I told you your secrets are gone, I said, turning away from him. I sat down at my vanity and calmly began brushing my hair, watching his reflection in the mirror. Vance, this is your only lifeline. He stood petrified in the middle of the room, a statue of crumbling ego. After a long minute of agonizing silence, he walked slowly toward me, his knees hitting the floor with a dull thud. He looked up at my face, his eyes rimmed with raw, desperate red. Vesper, his voice broke, splintering into a pathetic whine. Did it really have to come to this? I looked down at the man who had once been my world, now literally groveling at my feet. You paved this road, Vance, I said softly. I know I made unforgivable mistakes, he pleaded, grabbing my hand, which lay limp and unresponsive in his grip. My relationship with Sloan, the pills, I regret all of it, but I realize today that you are the only woman of true value in my life. Give me a second chance. I will change, I promise. We will raise this child together. We will build a real family. I will banish Alistair and Sloan to Bermuda, never to be heard from again. It will just be you, me, and our baby. I violently yanked my hand away from his suffocating grip, standing up to put distance between us. Vance, the fact that you are a traitor and a coward is one thing, but do not insult my intelligence, I snapped. You are telling me you are ready to abandon your own biological son, this Alistair, whom you have been doting on for months, just to save your financial interests and your public image? How could I, for even 1 second, imagine building a future with a creature so utterly repulsive? The man collapsed face first onto the rug, sobbing like a punished child. Vance Kensington, the heir to a prestigious dynasty, a titan of Wall Street who once walked with the gods of industry, was weeping in the dust at my feet. Vesper, I am begging you, don't leave me, he choked out between gasps. I can't live without you. I watched him from above, feeling a complex, swirling mix of emotions that contained neither pity nor regret, but an immense, heavy weariness tinged with profound disgust. He still did not grasp the nature of this collapse. He labored under the delusion that I was leaving him out of petty jealousy over Sloan or mere anger over his deception. He could never comprehend that I was fleeing a hollow marriage where I was never treated as a human being, but rather as his social prop, a vessel he perceived as a barren womb. His mother's eyes, a legally binding signature designed to validate his status, nothing more than an accessory to be polished for galas and stored away in the silence of our cold, cavernous bedroom. For 5 long, suffocating years, I had shed my own skin, piece by piece, until the woman I used to be was entirely eclipsed by the stifling weight of the title Mrs. Kensington. I looked down at him, my voice devoid of the warmth he so desperately craved, and repeated with the icy precision of a surgeon, "Initial the financial amendments to the agreement." After several agonizingly long minutes of his useless performative tears, he finally dragged himself up from the Persian rug. The vitality that usually defined his powerful silhouette was gone, replaced by a pathetic, stumbling gait. He snatched the Montblanc pen from my hand, his fingers trembling with a visceral, impotent rage, and slashed his initials onto the $3 million clause. He threw the pen against the hardwood floor. It clattered like a gunshot in the heavy silence. He stared at me with eyes that burned with a concentrated, pure hatred, a look that would have once shattered me. "You will regret this, Vesper," he spat. "Maybe," I replied, my voice steady, my movements fluid as I retrieved the papers. "But right now, the only regret that poisons my soul is the bitter knowledge that I didn't leave 5 years ago." I walked down the grand staircase, my heels clicking a rhythmic, liberated heartbeat against the marble. My designer bag, tucked firmly under my arm, felt like it contained my entire future. Cordelia had just returned from the foyer, seated in the velvet wingback chair with baby Alistair in her lap, while Greta hovered in the background preparing tea. As Cordelia caught sight of the documents in my hand, her features hardened into a mask of vitriolic disdain. "What is that? That divorce settlement signed by your son?" She leaped to her feet, the sudden movement causing the baby to recoil, and he immediately began to scream in a high, piercing register of terror. Without a second thought for the infant's distress, she lunged at me, her manicured nails clawing at the air, her face twisted into an ugly snarl of desperation. I pivoted, my movements sharp and practiced, and swiftly dodged her grasp, zipping the precious document deep into the sanctuary of my bag. "You won't get a single cent of Kensington money, you miserable parasite," she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "Calm down, Cordelia," I said, my tone as cool as mountain air. "I am not touching your decaying empire. I am simply reclaiming the spousal support that is legally mine, a modest price for the upbringing of your future grandson." "What grandson?" she sneered, her lip curling in a grotesque display of contempt. "We don't even know if this fake pregnancy of yours will actually go to term. And even if it does, that child will never be worth the exorbitant money you are demanding. Consider it the price of the youth you stole from me," I concluded, my back already turned to her as I navigated toward the front door. "Stop right there," my mother-in-law screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Leave those documents. That is family property." I didn't even bother to turn around. The woman was no longer worth the expenditure of my breath. I pulled open the heavy oak door, and the bright, unyielding afternoon sun hit me like a revelation, momentarily blinding me. "Vesper!" Vance's voice echoed from the top of the stairs, breathless and shattered. "Are you really leaving?" I looked back one final time. He stood on the landing, gripping the wrought iron railing as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, his face gray as cold, dead ash. He looked like a masterpiece of a man, a marble statue on the absolute verge of crumbling into fine dust. "Yes, I am leaving," I said softly, the words feeling like a benediction. "I wish you all the best with Sloane." I crossed the threshold of the Kensington estate, leaving the oppressive history behind me. Behind me rose the cacophony of my mother-in-law's shrill screams, Alistair's piercing, inconsolable cries, Greta's vain, fluttering attempts to restore order, and the heavy, deathly silence of my husband. I didn't look back. Looking back was for people who still had something to lose. Merrick's black sedan was waiting patiently outside the main iron gates, a silent sentinel in the shade. As I approached, he flashed his headlights once and stepped out to open the passenger door for me. I slid into the cool leather seat, buckled my belt with a shaky hand, and clutched the bag containing my life to my chest. Merrick pulled away without a single word, his focus absolute as we sped away from the suffocating, manicured elite neighborhoods of Greenwich toward the freedom of the interstate. The familiar, stifling landscape blurred past the window, slowly fading into a distant memory. "Where are we going?" Merrick asked, his eyes catching mine in the rearview mirror. "Drop me off at a discreet hotel for now," I said. "Then I will hunt for an apartment in the city. I will resurrect my career as a lawyer and rebuild my existence from the ashes." Merrick glanced at me again, his gaze searching. "Do you have enough cash to survive the short term?" I opened my wallet, the thinness of it mocking my previous life of opulence. I had $300 and a Kensington Platinum card, which Vance would surely freeze within the hour. "Personal cash? Enough for 3 days," I whispered. Merrick reached over and popped the glove box of his Audi, pulling out a thick, heavy envelope and handing it to me. "There is about $5,000 in there. Take it. It is an advance on our future payout." I looked at the envelope, my heart swelling with a mix of shame and gratitude. "Take it, Vesper," he insisted in a tone that brokered no argument, practically forcing it into my bag. "You aren't alone anymore. You have a child to feed. You can choose to skip meals to starve yourself into nothingness, but the baby doesn't have that option." I placed a trembling hand over my stomach, feeling the nascent life within. After a long moment of heavy, profound silence, I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Merrick. Thank me when we get a judge to officially rubber stamp this settlement. Take care of yourself, Vesper. Take care of the life within you." His words hung in the air, weighted with a gravity that made the skin on my arms prickle. He pulled away from the curb, leaving me standing on the bustling, uncaring sidewalk of Manhattan. Merrick had dropped me off at a high-end, discreet boutique hotel, a sanctuary of velvet curtains and hushed corridors where no one would ask why a woman with trembling hands and hollow eyes was checking in alone. I climbed the stairs to the suite, the luxury feeling alien, almost mocking. Once inside, I threw the deadbolt, the metallic click sounding like a gunshot in the stillness. I dropped my heavy bag onto the plush duvet and sank into the armchair, my body finally surrendering to the crushing weight of the day. The silence of the room was thick, broken only by the rhythmic, low hum of the AC, a sterile sound that seemed to measure out the seconds of my new, terrifying autonomy. I reached into my bag and withdrew the divorce settlement. The parchment felt heavy like a shroud. At the bottom of the final page, stark and jagged against the pristine white, was the signature of Vance Kensington. It was an erratic, arrogant scrawl, the same hand that had signed away 5 years of my life with the cold indifference of a man pruning a dead branch. 5 years of my existence, vaporized by a few strokes of ink on legal-sized paper. I stood, my legs feeling like lead, and wandered into the bathroom. The mirrors were expansive, unforgiving. I turned the cold water on full blast and splashed it over my face, the shock of the temperature biting into my skin, dragging me back to reality. My reflection stared back. A pale, translucent woman, eyes rimmed with the redness of nervous exhaustion. But as I leaned in, staring into my own pupils, I saw something else, something primal. A light was flickering behind my gaze, untamable and fierce. As of this moment, the label of Mrs. Kensington was dead. I was just Vesper Sterling, 32, a woman standing on the precipice of ruin, pregnant, with a fragile bundle of cash in my pocket, and a future that was a complete, terrifying blank. But I was finally, irrevocably free. I dried my face with a crisp white towel and returned to the bed, clicking my laptop open. The glow of the screen illuminated the room. 32 years old. JD from Columbia Law, 2 years as a federal law clerk, and then the void. A 5-year employment gap that stared back at me like an open wound. Every instinct told me it was my professional death sentence. But as I looked at it, the bitterness in my chest hardened into resolve. It wasn't a gap. It was a grueling, unpaid boot camp, financed by my own tears and the systematic dismantling of my spirit. I had learned to decode the darkest corners of human nature, to study the mechanics of a master manipulator from the inside, and to claw my way out of the wreckage of a broken marriage. No law school syllabus could ever teach the curriculum I had survived. My phone vibrated against the bedside table, shattering my reverie. A text from Merrick. Vance just called me. He is threatening to press charges against you for extortion and blackmail. A genuine laugh bubbled up from my throat. A harsh, jagged sound. Let him try. I had kept every receipt, every digital breadcrumb. I had the counter-evidence for every single one of his manufactured claims. It was a pathetic, transparent intimidation tactic, the last gasp of a cornered predator. I know, Merrick replied instantly. He's a coward. He'll never go through with it. What are your plans for tomorrow? I turned to the window. The sun was beginning its slow descent over the jagged New York skyline, bathing the city in a bruised golden light that promised nothing. I whispered to the glass, survive first, then live better than anyone else. I drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be dragged back into the cold light of reality by the shrill, insistent vibration of my phone at 2 a.m. Merrick's voice was a low, urgent rasp. Vesper, listen to me. Vance is finalizing the concealment of his remaining assets. I just got a tip from a highly reliable source. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., he has an appointment with his corporate attorneys to transfer his entire 15% stake in Kensington Holdings to Sloan Dempsey. I sat bolt upright, the sheets tangling around my legs, and fumbled for the nightstand lamp. A 15% stake. My mind began to race, the legal frameworks I had studied for years clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. What's the current market valuation? I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. Roughly $40 million, Merrick stated, his tone grim. But that's not the worst part. The second the transfer deed is filed, he plans to submit a petition for Chapter 11 personal bankruptcy, declaring himself legally insolvent. If that goes through, all his creditors are frozen, and you will never see a single dime of your $3 million settlement. My legal brain, dormant for 5 years, roared to life with the clarity of a blade. Where is he right now? At the Greenwich estate, Merrick confirmed. His Porsche is parked in the driveway. He's home. Got it, Vesper. What are you going to do? Do not do anything reckless. I hung up without answering, the silence of the room replaced by the frantic beating of my heart. I grabbed my clothes, dressing in the dark with trembling efficiency, and rushed out into the humid night to catch an Uber. 45 minutes later, the silhouette of the Kensington estate emerged from the darkness like a looming fortress. It was 3 a.m. The street was plunged into an abyssal, suffocating darkness, save for a faint, sickly yellow light spilling from the window of Vance's second-floor study. I walked to the wrought iron gates, my hands gripping the cold metal. I pressed the intercom button firmly, the sound echoing through the dead air. After several agonizing minutes, Greta's exhausted silhouette appeared, wrapped in a threadbare bathrobe, her eyes wide with bewilderment. Seeing me standing there in the moonlight, she froze. Mrs. Vesper? Please. What are you doing here at this hour? Open the gate, Greta, I commanded, my voice cold enough to cut through the night. This is a matter of life and death. She hesitated, her loyalty warring with her fear. Before pressing the unlock button, the gate creaked open. I pushed through, my resolve propelling me up the driveway. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the blood pounding in my ears, and reached the study door. Without knocking, I violently pushed open the heavy oak doors. The wood groaned in protest against the force of my intrusion, echoing like a gunshot in the stagnant air of the study. Vance was hunkered down behind his massive mahogany desk, a fortress of ink and deceit. He was buried amidst a chaotic sprawling of legal documents, the harsh, clinical glow of his computer monitor cutting through the gloom of the room like a surgical blade, casting long, grotesque shadows that danced across his features. At the sight of me, disheveled, breathless, and radiating a fury that transcended physical exhaustion, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. He surged upward, his chair skidding backward with a sharp, piercing screech against the hardwood floor. How did you get in here? His voice cracked, a jagged tremor revealing the fragility of his composure. Very easily I snapped back, my voice vibrating with a dangerous, quiet heat. I crossed the distance between us in 3 long predatory strides and descended upon his desk, my fingers trembling not with fear, but with the adrenaline of absolute clarity as I scanned the mountains of paper he had sought to hide. There they were. The share transfer deeds inscribed with the name of Sloan Dempsey, the architect of his betrayal. The Chapter 11 bankruptcy petition, a desperate, rotting legal lifeline. The liquidation ledgers that mapped out the systematic erosion of our life together. It was all there. A roadmap of betrayal laid bare in black and white. Vance, are you seriously about to transfer your 15% stake to Sloan to organize a fraudulent bankruptcy? I grabbed the transfer deed, the paper feeling coarse and cold beneath my touch. A death warrant for the future I had once believed in. His complexion drained of all color, leaving his skin a sickly parchment gray. Who told you? He hissed, his eyes darting toward the shadows of the room as if seeking an exit. It doesn't matter, I retorted, pinning him with a gaze that refused to blink. My question is simple. How do you plan to honor the $3 million divorce settlement if you voluntarily strip yourself of your assets? Vance stared at me for a long, suffocating moment, the initial panic in his eyes slowly, sickeningly, morphing into a twisted, triumphant smirk. A dark, guttural laugh escaped his throat, a sound devoid of humanity. Vesper, did you really think you won? He sneered, leaning into the light. In our settlement, it explicitly states that the spousal support is payable from my personal liquid assets, if my personal assets are officially reduced to 0 by tomorrow morning. What exactly do you plan to seize? He stepped closer, his physical presence looming over me. A desperate attempt to shroud me in his shadow and exert the old familiar dominance. You threatened me with a massive lawsuit and exposing my assets. Do it. The second I file this transfer and the bankruptcy court declares me insolvent, I will be legally ruined under U.S. law. What do you hope to extract from a legally bankrupt man? His voice dropped to a taunting, razor-edged whisper. And how do you plan to raise that bastard in your stomach without a dime of child support? I stood perfectly still, a pillar of ice against his fire, holding his furious, desperate gaze until he felt the weight of it. Vance reached out, his hand clamping onto my chin with a rough, bruising intensity, forcing me to look at him. I told you, you will bitterly regret trying to outsmart me, he growled. I didn't scream, I didn't plead. I simply shoved his arm away with a violent, final flick of my wrist, reclaiming my space. I took a deliberate step back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and pulled my phone from my coat pocket. My thumb hovered over the glass for a fleeting second before I tapped the play button on the most recent audio file. The silence of the study was shattered. The recording was pristine, his own voice echoing back at him, crisp, arrogant, and damning. If my personal assets are officially reduced to 0 by tomorrow morning, what exactly do you plan to seize? The second I file this transfer and the bankruptcy court declares me insolvent, I will be legally ruined. What do you hope to extract from a legally bankrupt man? Vance's smirk disintegrated. The color bled from his face, replaced by a deathly, corpse-like pallor that seemed to sap the very oxygen from the room. You recorded me from the second I walked in? He stammered, his facade collapsing like a house of cards. Vance, every single word you just said, openly admitting your intent to commit bankruptcy fraud and hide assets to evade our divorce settlement, has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server managed by my attorney, I said, my voice steady, cold, and final. I slipped the phone back into my bag, the soft click of the zipper sounding like the closing of a tomb. You thought you won. You lost. The moment you decided to strip me of everything to fund your mistress and your bastard child, you signed your own death warrant. He staggered back, his knees hitting the chair, and he collapsed into it, gripping his head with both hands as if he were trying to contain the sudden, violent shattering of his world. Vance, I am giving you one final chance to keep your freedom, I said, my tone a measured rhythmic pulse of command. First, you shred this fraudulent transfer deed immediately. Second, you order your bank to wire the $3 million into my attorney's escrow account by noon tomorrow. Third, you sign the addendum irrevocably waiving your parental rights. If you do this, the audio recording stays sealed. If you refuse, I am sending it to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the SEC by 9 in the morning. You won't just lose your company. You are going to spend the next 10 years in federal prison for wire fraud and bankruptcy fraud. Vance looked up, his face ravaged by a terror so profound it turned his features into a mask of pathetic ruin. His lips trembled, a useless fluttering movement of air. Vesper, you are a cold-blooded monster, he whispered, the accusation hanging in the air like smoke. I am simply a woman you pushed over the edge, I replied, my eyes hardening into flint. Suddenly, the study doors burst open with a crash that rattled the glass panes. Cordelia Kensington stormed into the room, draped in a silk nightgown that looked like a shroud, her hair wild and tangled, her eyes wide with a frantic hysterical fury. She had obviously been eavesdropping, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unbridled malice. She had been eavesdropping, her soul curdled by the venom of her own ambition. She did not merely enter the room, she detonated into it. She lunged at me with the predatory grace of a feral animal backed into a corner, her eyes wide, bloodshot, and burning with a toxic, irrational fervor. You miserable, wretched thing, she shrieked, her voice a serrated blade tearing through the tense atmosphere of the study. You dare? You dare try to destroy my son? I will kill you before I let you ruin this legacy. Before I could even draw a breath to defend myself, she descended upon me. Her fingers, tipped with razor-sharp, perfectly manicured nails, clawed into my scalp with a savage, primitive strength. I felt the skin of my forehead tear under the pressure, a searing white-hot agony that sent a shockwave of nausea crashing through my senses. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed off the mahogany walls, and instinctively threw my hands up to push her back. But she was a whirlwind of hatred. With her free hand, she delivered a brutal, blinding slap across my face. The impact was sickening. A dull thud followed by the explosive sting of skin against skin. My vision fragmented into a kaleidoscope of dancing shadows, the room spinning violently as my equilibrium shattered. Greta, hearing the commotion, vaulted into the room, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She scrambled toward us, her small hands pulling frantically at Cordelia's silk sleeves, pleading, begging, trying in vain to pry the older woman off me. But Cordelia was beyond reason, consumed by an adrenaline-fueled rage that turned her into a titan of spite. Vance, meanwhile, remained utterly motionless, glued to his mahogany chair as if his soul had been cauterized. He was a paralyzed spectator to the nightmare, his eyes wide and vacant, watching the destruction of his own progeny without lifting a finger. In the midst of that chaotic, violent struggle, I felt a massive, unrelenting force shove me backward. The world tilted. My heel caught on the edge of the thick pile of the Persian rug, and I tumbled, my body becoming a ragdoll caught in the gravity of the room. As I fell, my lower back and right side slammed with sickening, bone-jarring impact against the sharp, unyielding solid brass corner of the antique mahogany desk. A blinding, agonizing pain like a jagged blade of fire twisting deep within my flesh, radiating from my lower abdomen, engulfed my entire nervous system. The breath was punched out of my lungs, and I collapsed onto the hardwood floor, instinctively curling into a fetal position, my hands clutching at my stomach as if I could hold the pieces of my life together with sheer willpower. Then the cold reality set in. A sensation of warmth, sickeningly thick and alien, began to pool rapidly between my thighs. My heart plummeted into the abyss. My baby, I whispered, the words barely a rasp, my voice choking in the constriction of my throat. Greta, catching sight of the dark, crimson stain blossoming across the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, let out a blood-curdling scream that seemed to tear the very air apart. "Oh my God, she's bleeding. It's a hemorrhage. Call 911. Hurry, for the love of heaven, hurry." Cordelia froze mid-motion, her hands still trembling with residual violence. The manic hysteria evaporated from her face in an instant, replaced by a hollow, paralyzing shock as she stared at the spreading pool of life essence. Vance finally snapped out of his trance, his face draining of all color until he looked like a ghost haunting his own home. He scrambled over, dropping to his knees beside me with a clumsy, desperate urgency. As the hemorrhaging intensified, turning the fabric of my clothes into a heavy, sodden shroud, he hovered over me. "Vesper, Vesper, look at me. What is happening?" he stammered, his bravado utterly dismantled. I stared up at him, my vision blurring, my fingers digging into the skin of his wrist with every flickering ounce of strength I had left. The pain was an ocean and I was drowning. "Call an ambulance," I gasped, my voice barely audible over the roar of blood in my ears. "I am begging you. Save my child." Vance fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so violently that he dropped it twice, the device skittering uselessly across the floor. Greta, her face wet with tears, ripped it from his trembling fingers and dialed 911 with shaking digits. Lying there, broken and drifting, I stared up at the baccarat chandelier. Its crystals caught the light, refracting it into 1,000 tiny mocking stars. The microcamera Elias had hidden in the heart of the fixture was still running, methodically recording every second of this carnage. The assault, the fall, the crimson stain, and Vance's gutless hesitation. My eyelids grew impossibly heavy, weighted down by the encroaching shadows. My consciousness began to fray at the edges. The frantic, discordant sounds, Greta's jagged sobbing, Cordelia's panicked, whispered prayers of self-preservation, and Vance's frantic, impotent shouting, all began to recede, sounding as though they were coming from a great distance beneath the sea. The very last thing I registered before the total velvet darkness consumed me was the distant, piercing, mournful wail of MT sirens, tearing through the quiet Greenwich night like a herald of judgment. I woke to the sterile, oppressive silence of a hospital room, the air thick with the sharp, clinical smell of antiseptics and synthetic cleanliness. My right arm was tethered to an IV drip, a steady cold line providing the lifeline I so desperately needed. Beside the bed, the heart monitor chirped with a metronomic rhythmic pulse, counting the seconds with a cold mechanical precision that felt like a mockery of my own frailty. The door to my private sanctuary was cracked open, admitting the hushed, frantic murmur of the intensive care unit staff. I attempted to shift my weight, a reflexive movement of instinct, but a jagged bolt of agony shot through my pelvis, pinning me back against the pillows like a butterfly to a board. My breath hitched. Slowly, with a tremor of profound terror, I moved my left hand to my stomach. The slight, protective curve of my body was still there. Life, fragile, flickering but present, was still pulsing beneath my palm. I let out a long, shuddering breath, a sound that felt like a drowning victim finally breaking the surface of a dark, suffocating ocean. "You are finally awake." The voice was calm, anchored in professional expertise. A figure clad in a crisp white coat moved into my line of sight. It was Dr. Rosalind Hayes. She approached the bed with measured steps, her eyes scanning the cardiac readouts with a clinical intensity before she inspected the line. She looked down at me, her expression softening into a weary, warm smile. "Your vitals are perfectly stable, and the fetal heart rate is excellent," she said, offering the only words that could have saved my soul from shattering. "The uterine contractions have been successfully suppressed by the medication, but you are to remain on strict, absolute bed rest starting this moment. We cannot afford to risk any further complications. The stakes are too high." "My baby," I murmured, my voice a broken, terrifying shadow of itself. "Zishi. Your child is safe and sound, Vesper," she reassured me, reaching out to rest a hand over mine. Rosalind sat on the edge of the mattress, her face turning grave, the shadows of the hospital light deepening the lines of concern around her eyes as she prepared to discuss the reality of what had brought me to this brink of losing everything. Serious, but it was incredibly close. Her eyes, usually clinical and detached, softened with a glint of sympathetic gravity as she began to detail the harrowing reality of the accident. The blunt force trauma you sustained upon striking the edge of the mahogany desk had triggered a violent, partial placental abruption. It was a silent, internal catastrophe that could have ended everything. You lost nearly 800 milliliters of blood before the paramedics even managed to stabilize you in the ambulance. 800 milliliters. It is a terrifying, staggering volume for a body to lose, let alone while carrying a fragile life within. Had those 20 minutes of transit stretched any longer, the fetus would not have survived the sudden, suffocating lack of oxygen. I felt a cold shiver trace my spine, my hand instinctively pressing against the curve of my abdomen. 800 milliliters? The weight of the number felt heavy, suffocating. A flicker of panic rippled through me as I whispered, my throat dry and raspy, Who came with me in the ambulance? Dr. Rosalind's brow furrowed, a shadow of disdain passing over her features as she adjusted her stethoscope. Your husband followed the EMTs here, yes. He sat paralyzed in the surgical waiting room for the entirety of your time in the operating room. He was a statue, rigid and silent, refusing to leave his post until my staff confirmed you were finally stable. But the moment they moved you to recovery, he tried to rush to your bedside. Yet my staff blocked him per my strict orders. I stayed perfectly still, the silence in the room thickening as I processed the fractured reality of the last few hours. Where is he now? I asked, my voice barely audible. He left about 2 hours ago, she replied, checking her watch. You were unconscious for nearly 6 hours total. He sat in that cold hallway for 4 of them, staring at the walls, before a young woman arrived to collect him. They left together. Sloane. She had come to retrieve her man, like a scavenger claiming a prize. Vesper, the doctor continued, her tone shifting to one of professional transition, as she pulled a neutral manila envelope from the deep pocket of her coat. Before he retreated, your husband left this at the nurse's station, explicitly meant for your eyes only. My fingers trembled as I took the envelope, the paper crisp and cold against my skin. Inside I found 2 items, a stark black bank card embossed with my name, and a single sheet of heavy cream-colored Kensington letterhead. My pulse quickened as I read the words scrawled in Vance's frantic, jagged handwriting. A signature of a man who had finally realized his leash was gone. 3 million wired. I accept the settlement without conditions. The child is yours. I waive all rights. I stared at the paper until the ink seemed to dance and blur before my eyes. $3 million. The agreement was finally signed. The legal tether to my tormentor had been severed. The child was mine and mine alone, protected by the laws he had once thought he could use against me. He had capitulated. Faced with the encroaching shadow of prison and the total irreparable destruction of his social and financial life, Vance had finally broken under the weight of his own hubris. I folded the letter, the paper feeling heavy with the gravity of my new freedom, and slipped it under my pillow, the debit card tucked safely against it like a shield. Dr. Hayes, I said, looking up with a newfound steely resolve, when can I leave? Not for another week at least, Rosalind said with a firm, uncompromising tone. You are under strict bed rest. Once the placental abruption shows absolute signs of healing and the internal bleeding has ceased, you may go home, provided you avoid every form of physical exertion until your due date. Will the hemorrhage affect the baby's long-term development? I asked, the mother in me overriding my own exhaustion. Absolutely not, the doctor assured me, immediately intuiting my deepest fear. You are young, your recovery markers are excellent, and with the iron supplements we have prescribed to rebuild your blood volume, you will carry this baby to term with no further risk. But you must excise all sources of stress from your life, Vesper. It is non-negotiable. I nodded, a sense of profound, hollow relief washing over me. Once the door clicked shut and I was finally alone, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with the ghost of a dozen missed calls from Merrick Thorne, the final one having arrived only minutes ago. I dialed him back. He picked up on the very first ring, his breath hitching. "Vesper? You're awake." His voice betrayed a massive, uncharacteristic relief. "Yes, I'm okay," I said softly. "The baby is safe." I heard him exhale a heavy, shuddering breath on the other end. "I reviewed the hidden camera footage from last night, Vesper. The footage of your mother-in-law physically assaulting you, the way she shoved you against that desk, it is crystal clear. If you want, I will walk this directly into the Manhattan District Attorney's office right now. Aggravated assault on a pregnant woman. She would face severe felony charges. She would go away for a long time." "No, Merrick," I replied, my voice steady despite the fatigue pulling at my eyelids. "I'm not filing charges. I am utterly exhausted. 5 years of living in a nightmare with that family is enough. Vance has signed the agreement. The money is in escrow and the child is legally mine. That is all I ever wanted. I refuse to spend the next 5 years of my life dragging them through criminal courts, forced to relive this trauma every time I step into a courtroom. I just want to have my baby in peace and start my new life." Merrick stayed silent for a long, heavy moment, the connection humming with his unspoken frustration. "All right. I respect your decision, Vesper," he eventually murmured. "But know this. I am keeping that video in my most secure encrypted vault. If he ever, and I mean ever, tries to come after you in the future, we have the ammo to nuke his entire world." "Thank you," I whispered. "Let me rest now." I hung up and let the phone drop to the bed, lying back against the pillows. I turned my head to gaze out at the Manhattan skyline visible through the narrow hospital window. Late afternoon was encroaching, painting the scattered clouds in shades of bruised violet and burning orange, signaling the end of one life and the silent, terrifying, beautiful beginning of another. Stunning shades of amber and crimson. I placed my hand against the gentle curve of my stomach, a protective instinct blooming within me, as if sensing my touch. Deep inside, the baby gave a tiny rhythmic flutter, a delicate movement like a small fish darting through crystalline water. A genuine, unguarded smile, one that had been absent for far too long, spread across my face. And as I smiled, the dam finally broke. Warm, salty tears spilled down my cheeks, blurring the city lights. They were no longer the stinging tears of pain, hollow despair, or the suffocating weight of fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated liberation, the kind that cleanses the soul of every bitter memory. A week later, the hospital doors swung open, releasing me into a world that felt brighter, sharper, and finally my own. Merrick was waiting, his steady presence a grounding force amidst the whirlwind of my new reality. He drove me to the apartment he had personally scouted in the charming tree-lined streets of Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. It was a sanctuary, a sun-drenched two-bedroom space with an open kitchen that smelled of fresh beginnings and large south-facing windows that captured the golden hour with breathtaking precision. A vibrant farmer's market bustled just down the block twice a week, and the subway was a mere stroll away, connecting me to a future I was finally brave enough to claim. The rent was reasonable, and Merrick, in his characteristic thoroughness, had negotiated a full year paid up front using the settlement funds, ensuring I would never have to worry about a roof over my head. I stood in the center of the sunlit living room, absorbing the stillness. The interior was simple yet elegant, curated by Merrick's paralegal to feel like a home rather than a temporary fix. A cozy velvet-soft sofa sat opposite a light oak dining table. A plush, cloud-like bed awaited me in the master suite, and nestled in the corner stood a solid wood desk, upon which rested a brand-new MacBook Pro. Merrick plugged the laptop into the wall, his expression serious. "A housewarming gift from the firm," he said softly. "Never forget the brilliant lawyer you are, Vesper." I looked at him, my throat tight with a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. Merrick, why have you helped me so much? Why go to such lengths for a ghost like me? He smiled, a warm, genuine curve of his lips. Because you are Vesper Sterling. Because I remember the sharpest, most brilliant girl in our Columbia Law cohort, whose radiant future was derailed by Vance Kensington's pathetic, fragile ego. I can't give you back those 5 years, but I can help you reclaim the power he tried to strip from you. Plus, let's be honest, my cut of that $3 million settlement is going to keep my firm very happy for a long, long time. We both burst into laughter, a sound that felt foreign and beautiful in the quiet air. My first real unburdened laugh in years. After Merrick departed, leaving me to the solitude I craved, I sat at my new desk and pressed the power button. As the screen hummed to life, revealing a pristine blank desktop, I felt the exquisite thrill of a clean slate. The 5-year marital hell was nothing more than a fading nightmare. A chapter closed. I meticulously set up a new professional email address and began crafting my resume. Vesper Sterling, 32, Juris Doctor, Columbia Law School, Federal Law Clerk, SDNY 5 years. Independent Crisis Management. It wasn't a lie. In many ways, it was an understatement. For 5 years, I had practiced the daily, grueling art of extreme patience, psychological profiling, and mental resilience against absolute adversity. I had learned to decode the venomous intentions of a master manipulator, to safeguard my core interests while under constant fire, and to rise phoenix-like from the ashes of betrayal. It was an education no Ivy League institution could ever provide. I hit send on my first batch of applications to Manhattan's elite firms, my fingers steady and sure. I closed the laptop and stepped onto my small balcony. A crisp autumn breeze brushed my face, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. Across the street, the windows of the brownstones flickered to life one by one, like embers in the Brooklyn twilight. Behind every pane of glass was a human destiny, a story unfolding in the dark. Mine had just begun. Suddenly my phone buzzed, vibrating against the iron railing. A text from an unsaved number. Vesper, it's Sloan. Vance was raided at dawn by the FBI and the SEC. He's been indicted for wire fraud, massive tax evasion, and fraudulent conveyance. Kensington Holdings accounts are frozen. The company is filing for Chapter 11. Are you happy now? I read the message, my pulse steady, feeling not a single drop of turbulence. Vance was behind bars. The Kensington empire was collapsing under the weight of its own hubris. Sloan had expected me to revel in the vengeance, to gloat in the ruins of the man who tried to destroy me, but I felt neither joy nor sadness. I felt only a profound, crystalline peace. That man, that toxic marriage, those destructive lies, they were permanently erased from my world, no longer capable of reaching me. I deleted the text, blocked the number, and let the silence swallow the screen. I walked back inside my warm, glowing apartment, took a long steaming shower that washed away the last traces of the past, and slid into the crisp, cool sheets of my new life. I gently placed both hands on my stomach. The baby gave a soft, rhythmic kick against my palm, a heartbeat answering my own. Good night, my treasure, I whispered into the quiet dark of my new bedroom. Mommy loves you with all the intensity of a soul finally set free. A love that has weathered the storms of deceit to find its sanctuary in this hallowed stillness. I closed my eyes, feeling the gentle pulse of new life beneath my fingertips, a miraculous heartbeat that serves as the only truth I will ever need to know. The shadows of the past, once towering and suffocating, have dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind a silence that is not empty, but filled with the profound weight of my own autonomy. Here, in the cradle of my own making, I am no longer defined by the wreckage of a shattered empire or the hollow echoes of a man who knew nothing of devotion. I am the architect of my own serenity, breathing in the scent of fresh linens and the promise of a dawn that belongs entirely to us. Every kick, every flutter against my skin is a quiet anthem of survival, a promise that we are safe, that we are whole, and that the long cold winter of my imprisonment has finally surrendered to the light of a morning that will never fade. Sleep pulls at my eyelids heavy and sweet, as I drift into a world where the only thing that matters is the steady, rhythmic assurance that we are finally home, resting in the soft, untroubled cradle of our own quiet.